thank you all very, very much. We had considering that we only had 2 vendors at the inside building, we made $800, so we did real good. And then our next one is next weekend, or this coming Saturday at the Silver Center. Sign-up sheets up there.
And this is the flyer, and if you're out and about anywhere, you just put it down someplace. Okay, this isn't for you.
So
You know about it, so.
sign-up sheets over there. Those of you that were not here last week, 13 and 15 needs to be done and turned in. If you haven't got it done, we'll turn it in next week, okay? So, also, this Saturday from 11 to 3 at the HEB Center, we need some volunteers to help Jerry. Where's Jerry?
Over here.
There she is, right. Help Jerry with the Ask the Master Gardener and the Naturalist, what is it? The
Native Plant Society.
yeah, Native Plant Society is they're ask them. So
They partnered with HEB.
right. So we need some help. If you want to volunteer to help, get with Jerry so she can get your information, because she'll be point on that, and then we're going to try to get a master gardener to sit in on that with you all. Okay? And I want to thank Miss Brittany. A lovely dissertation at our business meeting about Class 41. She deserves a big hand. All right, Bobby. Better late than never.
Hey, I'm dressed this morning.
Real quick, we're doing the Ask the Master Gardener at the HEB on Saturday from 11 to 3 if you're interested. And that, go down and sit with Jerry. If you'd like to sit there with her, talk to her. So, and then remember, 13 and 14 needs to be turned in today if you were here last week. If you haven't done so, we need to get it back here so the girls can score it for you. Okay? 13 and 15, I'm sorry. My apologies. Now, what you all been waiting for. One of the most dynamic speakers about bugs that I've ever seen. I sat there and watched 6 of her videos, and I just could not get up and do nothing. I was enthralled with it. Molly is a graduate of Texas A&M University in 2003 with a BS in biology and entomology, and she got her master's degree in entomology in 2005. So, and Molly is a mom. And so for the last few years, she's been raising a brood, and that's why you haven't heard much about Molly out and about, because she's been taking care of the family. But we are tickled and absolutely wonderful to have Molly with us. So let's give it up for Molly Keck.
Thank you. Okay, this is the clicker?
This one.
Okay.
Here's a
All right.
forward. Yeah. So there's the forward, and that's a back, and that's a pointer.
Okay, but it doesn't really show up on that, does it?
Yes.
It will show up on
Push the pointer and hold it.
Oh, cool, that's neat. I like that.
Thanks.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks for inviting me out. My name is Molly Keck. I work for the A&M Extension Service as an entomologist. I'm in Bexar County, but there's not a lot of us, so we're kind of regional, but housed in Bexar County. And this is my first Master Gardener class for 2026. So, but it's not the first one I've done. It's hundreds probably at this point. But I have it kind of broken up into two different talks, and I think you guys have color copies this year for them. I didn't update it, I don't think, so it should match almost perfectly, except for maybe some things taken out that were like videos that would have been a waste to print. So the first part is like an Into 101, why insects are cool, get you to appreciate insects a little bit more, and then we'll talk about how to kill the ones that you don't want to appreciate. So entomology is the study of insects, and also it's relative. So if you're an entomologist, you might be studying spiders, which are not insects, but they're very closely related, or scorpions or something like that. But when we look at kind of the relatives of insects, you'll see that of all of the arthropods, the vast majority are insects. And so if you're doing entomology, you're really looking mostly at insects. And insects of the arthropods are the ones that are the most economically significant, where they're, causing some harm to us in some way, or our plants in some way. And so, there are fun insects like fireflies and dragonflies a little bit, and I don't know, there's insects that are just walking sticks, right? But there's no one that's a true, real expert in those things because there's no need to study them as much, and there's also no funding to study things like that. The most well-known insects are those that are economically significant in some way, which is unfortunate, but you can always study whatever you want to study, but there's just less known about those that don't really cause any damage to them. The reason why people study insects, or why I got into entomology, is that they're pretty. I mean, you look at a dragonfly, when they're alive, their color is really vibrant. When they die, they kind of turn brown and they all look the same. But insects can be really beautiful if you look at them. Even some of the gross stuff, like a blowfly, if you look at it under the microscope and you start to see all the colors to it, they all have some real neat features to them. But I think most people appreciate or understand why insects are studied because they're beneficial in some way, or there are many of them that are beneficial. So honeybees are the most economically important insect to humans. There are others that are important in the environment and in other ways, but these guys are the best at pollinating agricultural systems because of the way that they recruit to food and call their nestmates into that food. They love a monoculture. And so you can stick them in a field or an orchard and they'll do great pollinating for us. In your backyard garden, you might get some honeybees that will pollinate, but you're usually getting more native bees because they like a little bit more of a hodgepodge. And you probably don't have an acre of tomatoes, right? You have 5 plants of tomatoes and then, a few plants of squash and something else. And they're just cool. I mean, I don't know. I don't care who you are. If you see a praying mantis on your back porch or in your garden, you get a little bit excited because you know it's eating something. It doesn't really care what it eats. It could be eating something good or bad. But most people get excited when they see some of those insects that we know are beneficial in some way or really good predators. And I think that praying mantises are one of those. So most insects are good. We only study really those bad ones, but the majority of insects that you come across are not going to be harmful. They're either going to be beneficial or neutral, which means they're not good or bad, like a walking stick. It doesn't really do anything beneficial, but it really doesn't do anything bad, so who cares about it? And the pest, I think, is in this situation too. So this time of year, we have a lot of pollen floating through the air, and there are some insects like blister beetles or carpet beetles that will feed on that pollen. So people will get carpet beetles like in their windowsills because they're coming after the pollen that's kind of stuck on your window screens, and then they can just squeeze underneath. And that might be a concern if you are the Hall of Horns, or you have a ton of taxidermied animals, or your Bass Pro Shop. But in our house, they're probably not going after our wool coats and other things. At this time of year, they're feeding on that pollen. So when people send me a picture and say, is this a good bug or a bad bug, that's a really loaded question, because what is it doing exactly? Is it one? Unless it's a bed bug, I don't think there's one bug that you should do something about if you just see one of them. But the pest is certainly in this situation, and if it's just crawling on the sidewalk outside, who cares, right? Or if it's, I had somebody send me a picture of a mesquite tree, I think, and there were powder post beetles in that mesquite tree. So the tree was dead, or at least that branch was dead, because they don't go after live wood, they like dried, dead wood. But they were kind of concerned about it, and I'm like, well, it's not in your house. They're in nature doing what they're supposed to do in nature, and so in that situation, I don't consider them to be a pest. The tree was dead, so who cares, right? They're just kind of helping break it down a little bit. If that tree was right next to your home and you had the same kind of wood floors, then maybe that would be a problem. So most bugs are good. And if you look at like where insects fall in that pie chart of living things, there are more insects on this earth than there are a combination of anything else that's alive. So you are passing by millions of them And most of them are tiny and live in places that we wouldn't even imagine, including our home, our hair, our body. Hopefully not your body so much. But that little tiny percentage that are harmful cause millions of dollars in damage. And if you just think about in your own home, if you ever get bed bugs or you've ever had termites, the cost to try to either prevent the termites, manage the termites, or deal with the bed bugs can get really, really expensive. And if you've got plants that are dying, you know, what the cost of buying those insecticides, the cost of your stress about worrying about them, having to replace plants that maybe were infested with them that ended up succumbing to them. And then one of the big costs is that the many transmit diseases and can cause death. And the big one in that are mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are the deadliest animals to humans above anything else. I don't know if it's above humans. I don't know if humans are the deadliest to humans, probably so, but at least maybe in times of not war, it's definitely mosquitoes. And so we'll go into what some of the good guys versus the bad guys look like. And the reason why it's important to understand who is beneficial and who is bad is because a lot of them look just alike. And I kind of, the analogy I kind of always use is, if I think about fish, all fish look the same to me. You know, I know a goldfish and I know like the Nemo fish, those look different. But brown fish in a river or a lake, they all look the same to me. Maybe catfish might look different. But I don't look at fish all day. A fisherman is like, hello, you can tell the difference between fish. I can't, but I can look at those bugs and I know that they're definitely different. But I look at bugs every single day. So many insects look very similar. People will call me and say, I have a bug, I'm finding a bug, what is it? It's little and it's black. And that's like not helpful at all, right? But that proves the point that to everyone, bugs are little and they're black, right? Or these guys are brown. So the one on the right is a beneficial insect, it's an assassin bug. And the one on the left is a leaf-footed bug. And in this picture, you can see that they, look a little bit different. But unless you have them side by side, when you see just one on the plant, it can be very confusing about what it is. Or you take a bad picture, or you have a bad memory in your mind, and you look it up online, or you use an app that is almost always wrong, and it tells you you've got something tropical from Australia. But if you see those assassin bugs and you assume maybe it's some sort of a leaf-footed bug and you go and kill one or kill them, you'll end up having another issue because they were helping take care of something. But then on the flip side, you also don't want to see a bunch of leaf-footed bugs on your plants, assume they're assassin bugs, leave them alone, and then your tomatoes all die. So we'll go over how we can identify the good guys versus the bad guys. A lot of times, the damage on the plant can help identify who's doing it. A lot of insects are teeny tiny, or they're hiding underneath the leaf, or they're there, but you really have to be looking for them. And we kind of look at the big picture of the plant instead of zooming in on where they might be. But a lot of times you can look at damage and at least narrow down, around about what kind of insect it might be. So you don't have millions of options, you're looking at hundreds. And that maybe is a little bit easier for us to identify. So these are just some, pictures of who might be doing what, but we'll go into these guys a little bit more also. But knowing what type of damage you're looking at, the difference between chewing versus sap sucking versus kind of a rasping or leaf mining will at least take you down the right path for management. So if we break down where insects fall in the grand scheme of taxonomy and hierarchy and where they are, insects are in this kingdom Animalia, which is the most inclusive, right? We're underneath that kingdom. And then they're in this separate phylum. I think we're in phylum Chordata, but insects are in phylum Arthropoda. And so arthropods are things that have an exoskeleton. That's the biggest characteristic. They're usually somewhat bilaterally symmetrical. Hermit crabs, I think, have one big crab and one little one, so not every single one is. Their body is segmented, so they're not like a worm where everything is just kind of floating around. They're like us, where our brain is in one spot, and you go to the doctor and you have surgery, and they know where your liver's going to be. And that happens with insects too. So even though they're super tiny, they're like us, just miniature. They're advanced in that way. But the exoskeleton, I think, is the thing that most people think of. That's why they crunch when you step on them. Some of them have a hard exoskeleton, some of them are a little bit softer. Like a caterpillar is smushier, right? And then there are 5 different classes, usually, depending on what book you look at. But generally, most people categorize the arthropods in 5 classes. So we've got crustaceans, arachnids, insects, and then millipedes and centipedes. And so if let's try to break it all the way down to a monarch butterfly. And you can see how, the point of this is just to see how they're so diverse until you really get down to species. Even in the genus, the diversity can be really crazy. But when I was in school, kingdom was the biggest thing you had. Now there's this domain thing. So insects are eukaryotic organisms, multicellular organisms. They're in kingdom Animalia with tigers and starfish and fish and sharks and everything else that's an animal, right? Jellyfish too. But then this phylum Arthropoda, if you look at that block of things, it's still very diverse. Not many of those look very similar to one another. And really the only characteristic they have is, among other things, they have that exoskeleton on their body. And so insects are in class Insecta. In this picture, I think there's only like 3 or 4. There's one that's not even an insect, but 4 different orders. So that's just a snapshot, a teeny tiny snapshot, but still very diverse. Think of a termite versus a butterfly. Like those don't look very similar to one another, right? Unless you really know, you wouldn't guess that they're related to each other. And our Lepidoptera order, there's about 30 to 35 different orders of insects. They keep splitting them up and smushing them back together again. And I think it's so they can sell more textbooks, but I guess the taxonomists have to have jobs. But Lepidoptera are the butterflies. Butterflies, moths, and skippers. And so I think this is some butterflies and moths in this picture. And now we're starting to see that there's some shared characteristics. Big wings, kind of patterns to them, pretty. But the pattern of the wings might vary, and then the shape of the wings might vary. But there's something about them that, if we were playing a matching game, we would put these guys in the pile together. The monarch butterfly is in the family Nymphalid. These are brush-footed butterflies. So this is incredibly diverse. But if you look at it, I think that a lot of them, not every single one, but many of them have the same kind of outline to the wing. The pattern on the inside and the color is different, but a lot of them have the same shape of wing, the same kind of look to them. But it's still diverse in color, somewhat in shape too. I don't think I would see that top right zebra butterfly and guess that it was related to a monarch. It looks very different from it. So still diverse in family. And then when you get down to genus, these are the milkweed butterflies. In Texas, that's the soldier, the queen, and the monarch. And then there's one down south, and I can't remember what he's called, but we might get stragglers here, but very rarely. So now the coloring is kind of that orangey. It's starting to match up. They're starting to look similar. You could confuse some of these species for one another. And then when you finally get down to species, you're getting down to the one we know, which is that monarch butterfly. And the point of all this is just to say that there's no way we can, there are 300 and something different families of insects. If you want to know exactly what something is, one, what does it matter? Most of the time you just want to know, is it good, bad, and how do I kill it? And I can tell you that. But we're going to just look at the orders of insects, and that will help you in most guidebooks because they're usually grouped together down by order. And so you at least can figure out, I'm looking at a butterfly, a grasshopper, or whatever, I'll go to that right order, and then I can look through that little chapter instead of flipping through everything. So everything's usually organized by order, and that's all the time we have because it would take a semester or 2 of college to get through all the families. I think I don't know how many families we have in Texas, but we learn like 375 in college, so we couldn't do that today. You'd explode. So the relatives, though, of insects, crustaceans are one of those. So these are things that we eat. So if you hear about people eating bugs and you think it's gross, you probably eat shrimp, right? And we eat some of those shellfish, and they probably taste just the same as an insect does. Very, very similar. Most crustaceans, all crustaceans are aquatic or semi-aquatic. Most crustaceans are living in the water. Most of them are not on land and bothering our plants, but sow bugs or isopods, sow bugs and roly-polies can become a major garden pest. I need to probably change that. slide because they're really not a major garden pest unless we're really, really wet, and we're never really wet. We're in Texas, so when we overwater or we are in lucky years where it's just raining constantly and nothing can dry out, they can be a problem. But you kind of always see them in your garden, and they're not ever really an issue unless you're seeing hundreds upon hundreds of them. But they're aquatic. They need moisture. They're semi-aquatic. They need moisture to survive. So in this case, altering the environment, manipulating the environment can reduce their issues, because if we get rid of all that moisture, we let things dry out, they got to go somewhere else, or they're just not going to thrive. So knowing you know, what things need and what kind of environment they like, and a little bit about their biology can help you figure out how you can make them less happy and go away. Arachnids, we always think about arachnids, I think, as the relatives of insects, because they're creepy crawly, they have a lot of legs to them, right? These guys have 8 legs, 2 body parts. Insects have 6 legs and 3 body parts. Most of them are spiders, but ticks and mites, scorpions, vinegaroons, wind scorpions. There's a number of different types of arachnids. But by and large, most of these are going to be beneficial. Really, spiders are beneficial in your garden, but there are some mites that can be plant pests, and we'll talk about them. Spider mites, there's a lot of different species of spider mites, and technically not every spider mite is harmful, but you don't really see the predatory spider mites because they're not in numbers like you see the plant-feeding ones. And then centipedes and millipedes are 2 separate things. I got this little nifty thing that shows a millipede and a centipede in resin. And so the millipede is on the bottom, the centipede is on the top. Centipedes are predators. They're not going to bite you unless you touched it first. They're not going to attack you, so you can just kind of let them crawl around. We get those real big ones in Texas, but we also in some places get house centipedes, which I tend to notice in more rural areas than in urban areas, even given the name. But they're like not very big, and they're just all legs, and they're real kind of cool looking. Millipedes are more rounded. They have many more legs to them. They're fungal, organic, decaying organic matter type feeders. We get I think the more common one is that smaller one, but we will get larger ones in our area. And you'll find the millipedes in your garden under pots and things like that. The morphologically, the big difference between the two is that if you look at all the little pieces that make a centipede, it's a little bit easier to see them. I wonder if I have it. I don't. There's only one set of legs that comes off of each body segment, versus millipedes, if we were able to zoom in and see it tighter, there's 2 sets of legs that come off of each body segment. So one time we had a grower that thought they had a problem. They were worried about millipedes in something, and they took a picture of it, and it was not a great picture, but you could see the body segments and the legs, and we were able to say, oh, there's nothing to worry about. It's actually eating probably who knows what in that field. But millipedes might be in the garden, centipedes might, but rarely, and neither one I would worry too much about. And then there's insects, and this is the big one of the arthropods. There's more of them, they're more economically significant, much more known and studied about them, the bad guys of the arthropods, I guess. So insects, what makes an insect is they have 3 body regions. They have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. And it really should be actually 3 body, no, it's regions. Segment would be like a piece of a leg, I guess. On the insect's head is the sensory, everything for sensory. So it's just like us. Their mouth parts, their eyes, their antenna. The antenna for an insect does a lot for them, and there's a lot of different looks to antenna. And this is how many keys will ask about what the antenna look like to identify what it is you're looking at. And the point of the antenna is basically all their senses. So that they help them see, smell, taste, feel, and hear. But the biggest, the best, or the most important sense of the most important job of the antenna is smelling, because they communicate through smells. Not like we smell things in scents, but they're smelling pheromones and other cues, chemical cues that tell them different things. And so like Some insects have real big antennae. That's really neat. Like, and this is usually male so that they can find the female because he's now got more surface area to pick up those pieces. It's still one antenna. He still only has 2 antennae. He just has segments coming off of his antenna that make it really feathery. Some of their antennae can be cool. And then they have mouth parts. And I think knowing what mouth parts make what damage can really help you identify who might be doing the damage on that plant. So the most primitive type of mouth part an insect can have is chewing. There are lots of different chewers, grasshoppers, crickets, walking sticks, wasps, cockroaches, termites, things like that, caterpillars. They, well, okay, so let it move a little bit more. So that thing that's kind of moving up and down is like akin to our lip. It's called a labrum and a labium. So they have sclerotized hard lips to protect their teeth, which are really what our lips do. And then those black things that are coming side by side, those are his teeth. Those are his mandibles. And so when an insect is chewing, the bigger the hole you see, it's got to be a big mouth, big head, big bug. Small holes, you're looking for something really small. And those little finger type things are called palps. They kind of help them taste and shove food in their mouth, but they can't really physically do any tearing. So this guy is eating chunks of the tissue of the plant, right? Fresh tissue from the plant. They want the good green stuff. They're not going to go after old stuff. If there's old holes, it's old. It's not that someone came and ate old holes. And then, so their damage is holes, fresh, flesh out of the plant that's been taken out. Now there's lots of insects that chew, but the main 3 that you will find in the landscape making holes are going to be caterpillars, grasshoppers, or beetles. Sorry, I totally forgot what that was. Grasshoppers, caterpillars, or beetles. Now there are a million species of beetles and hundreds of species of caterpillars, but who cares exactly what it is? So that narrows it down from lots of options to just one. And with chewing insects, since they're consuming that plant, you can apply an insecticide and not actually see them, and they'll consume it, hopefully get a lethal dose and die. But also, think of a caterpillar, and they're also lazy. So a caterpillar is rubbing its body on that plant, so that it's also going to hopefully get a lethal dose, contact dose on its body. And he's got to clean its feet. Its feet are going to get gunked up with stuff, so they might also groom themselves and consume the insecticide that way. So the chewers can do a lot of damage. They can be very mobile and they can hide from us, but we don't necessarily have to see them to kill them a lot of the time. We can just see their damage, apply things, and hope that it kills them. Now, it's kind of like deer-resistant plants. It might be a deer-resistant plant, but if you have 100 deer come through and take one bite, you're still going to have a lot of damage. So they have to continue to consume the plant to get sick, to die from the insecticide, right? They're not going to touch it and then die immediately. So sometimes it'll get worse before it gets better when you've got chewing insects, and it's not going to be overnight. It's good. It's going to take a little bit more time, unless you catch it. And then other modifications to mouth parts, other adaptations they may have. The other big mouth part is having a piercing and a sucking mouth part, so they can pierce skin and suck blood like a mosquito. Or with plant feeders, they're piercing plant tissue and they're drinking up the phloem and the xylem. So you don't get holes in the plant, you just kind of get wilted, deformed leaves. So every piece of this guy's mouth is the same as the grasshopper. It is just modified to do something different. So the black thing in the middle is the teeth that you saw on the grasshopper, the black teeth that you saw. And then instead of having an upper lip that kind of like a mustache, that has been modified to be a sheath to protect that little skinny tooth. So sucking insects have this long mouth part. That's all that enters, the tip of that is all that enters the plant. So they're not, if you spray and don't know who's doing it, you're not really going to hurt them. They're not getting a lot of insecticide on them. And then when they feed, that mouth part is so long, they're really kind of shoving their body off of it. So they're not getting a contact dose. They can't groom themselves, and they're touching with the tips of their toes and the tip of their mouth. So for piercing, sucking insects, they can be more difficult to manage. You can't do the spray and pray method. You really have to look and find them. The good news is many of them, like think of aphids, whiteflies, mealybugs, scales, they are tiny, but they cluster and aggregate. So you just kind of figure out where they are and you spray. So it can be hard, but hopefully you have the ones that it's easy. And damage can vary, but it's usually deformed growth. That bottom left-hand picture, if you can kind of see it, if you were to touch those leaves, it would be textured. The leaf material doesn't come out looking the way that it should right now. It might be kind of blanched, like on that top picture. The left top is a roses, I think, and that new growth is coming out super deformed. You might have some dead patches where they've sucked all the juices out, and that dead can kind of crumble out, but it's margined in dead. It's not like it looks different than the chewing insect did. So you see this, like I went outside and I have my salvia is coming up, and I was like, that looks weird. It looked a different color. It looked like shriveled up, and I got closer, I had aphids all over it. So it's that deformed new growth, and it's not allowing it to get bigger. But you look at it and you know something doesn't quite look right. But you got to get in there and look under the leaves and look around, because looking at the whole plant, you're not going to ever see the suckers. You got to get deep. And most of those guys are hiding underneath the leaves. So look at damaged leaves and look at becoming damaged leaves, because that's once they've sucked all the good stuff out, they're moving on to something else. Some insects have lapping mouthparts. These are mainly bees, where they just kind of have like a long tongue like a dog does, so they can lap up nectar. And then butterflies, moths, and skippers have siphoning mouthparts, so it's just a sucking, a hostulate mouthpart. There's no piercing involved. And lapping mouthparts are kind of somewhere in between chewing and sucking, because they can chew like pollen and things, but they just have a long tongue. Whereas siphoning mouthparts, only sucking happens, so they can't, no matter how big and scary that moth looks, it can't actually hurt you. That's not it. Well, maybe it'll show. He was flitting around too much, but you can kind of see his little mouth part going into, there you can kind of see it, right? Going into those little lantana flowers. So that's the head. Mouth parts, eyes. We didn't talk about the eyes, but they have eyes. An antenna. And then all insects have 6 legs or 3 pairs of legs, and their legs are modified. I'll start this over here. I got this little thing that shows little types of legs. I thought it was kind of cute. But they all have they have legs modified for doing different things. And if you're into adaptations, that's kind of fun to look at, because you can see what, you can kind of guess what job they might have based off of their legs. And amazingly, the pieces of their legs are the same, really, as the pieces of our legs. And they only have 3 pairs of legs. So like some butterflies have, so their true little legs are kind of right here where it says thoracic. And then sometimes they have these little suckers that make them look like they have lots of legs. They're called pro legs. They're not true legs. There's no segmentation to them. It's just like a little suction cup. They can also have up to 2 pairs of wings. Some have no wings. Some have only 1 pair of wings. But if they have wings, they can have up to 2, which is, there's nothing else in the animal world that has 4 wings. And the only things that have wings, other than insects, are birds and bats have true wings. So that makes them unique. It makes them very successful. It's how they can get away from predators. It's how they can disperse. Even teeny tiny, they can be carried by the wind and go far, far places. And then they are completely covered by this exoskeleton. So when the summer comes and we start to get the cicadas on the sides of your house, look at it, because even the eyeball is covered in an exoskeleton. Every bit of its body is protected. That's why it can, fall off of the table and not smush. But if we were their size and we fell, we would be splat, right? That's why they're crunchy. And so this exoskeleton is it protects them. It helps them retain moisture. It's covered in kind of a waxy layer. But it limits their size, so you'll never have a bug that gets the size of your dog. They just can't. If they got that large, the exoskeleton would crush them. It would cave in and crush them. Some insects have very soft exoskeletons, like termites, Caterpillars do. A lot of immatures have softer exoskeletons so they can grow a little bit. But in order for them to truly grow, they have to molt and they have to shed that exoskeleton. And then they haven't hardened up yet, so they can pump up full of air and get a little bit bigger. So to get as big as a dog, that they would have to live forever, and they don't live that long. And if their body physically could not support that. That exoskeleton, though, makes it hard for us to manage them sometimes because it keeps things from penetrating. It just beads up on the outside. So we have to figure out better ways to apply things directly to them, or whatever the insect is, using different products. And if you use soapy water or insecticidal soap for insects, you're taking that waxy layer off so they eventually desiccate and dry out. It's just like using it to get the grease and stuff off your pots and pans, but on an animal. And so that every time they molt, they're going through this metamorphosis or this change in form. And I think this part is I think important as the mouth parts, because most insects, when they're in their most damaging phase, it's the immature form, because they're the teenagers hungry and feeding. And once you become an adult, that's a very short part of their life cycle. Their job really is just to find a mate, lay eggs, and die pretty soon after that. They don't live a long time as adults. It's the shortest time of their life. But we recognize what the adults look like. We don't recognize the immatures, and so we'll miss the time when it's time to step in and do something. But all insects have an egg form. There are some insects that do lay live birth, but they truly have an egg inside of them. The egg just hatches in and then they come out. And then they have an immature form of some type, which is the feeding form, usually the damaging form, and then an adult form. And there are two different types of life cycles they can have. The older, more primitive insects have this gradual life cycle where they're like us. They gradually turn into their adult form, really resembling the adult and the immature form. But it's just three forms: egg, immature, and the adult. And the complete life cycle is like your butterfly, where they've got an egg, a larvae, a pupa, and then the adult. So two immature forms. And that complete life cycle is more advanced because, and they have been on the earth a little less time, because usually the larvae and the adult aren't competing for the same food source. So if you think of like a butterfly, caterpillars have totally different mouth parts than butterflies do. Even if they're on the same plant, which they rarely are, they're feeding on different parts of the plant. So they're separating and not competing with their offspring. Versus gradual metamorphosis, everybody's just on that plant feeding on the same thing. And so this is that gradual metamorphosis. The eggs are laid on or near a host, and then the immatures hatch. And every molt that they do, they call it an instar. So if you're looking at instructions or a fact sheet or something, and it's saying like, it's best to get the earliest instars, or early instars are found here, later instars or wherever. It's just the molts that they do. So early instar would be, it's only molted a few times. Later instars are getting closer to being an adult. And there's a lot that have gradual metamorphosis: grasshoppers, termites, praying mantises, walking sticks, stink bugs, a lot of the like mealybugs, scales, and aphids, a lot of those. So everybody, babies and adults, are all on that plant at the same time. And these are just some pictures. So the immature does look like the adult. It's going to be a lot smaller, and you can't really see that in this picture. The immatures their color looks different because they don't have developed wings yet. And those wings, when they cover the abdomen, they give them a harder shell, but they give them a different color and texture. So the immatures are more vulnerable and susceptible to less insecticide contact and dying from it, but they're also feeding more. So to try to treat, when you start seeing immatures and recognizing what those immatures look like, will usually give you a better management. I feel like I'm ignoring this side of the room, and I apologize. And I'm facing this way. I guess I could face here and I can look at it there.
They're the students.
Okay, good. And this is the leaf-footed bug. That's not actually, I need to change this because the leaf-footed bug adult for this immature is the one that gets on your tomato plants. But this is an example of where the color can be very different. And then every time this little baby is going to molt, it's going to get a little bit darker and a little bit darker. But you look at it and you're like, okay, well, I can see how they look like you know, it looks like a toddler version of that adult. Sometimes you'll hear the word naiad, and that is, sorry, that's my teenager telling me I have to pay something for her. She won't never talk to me otherwise. Naiad just means that you are aquatic. You live in the water, so we don't really care about that as gardeners. And then a complete life cycle is fewer insects, but like butterflies, moths, skippers, beetles, fleas, ants, wasps, bees, lacewings. Oh, I can just read it off of there. Doodlebugs, less of them, but more advanced insects. And so they've got a true larvae, a true pupa, and then the adult form. And the larvae is the damaging form, but it oftentimes looks nothing like the adult. Like that's kind of the point of the hungry, it's one of the points of the very hungry caterpillar, right, in the story, is that it turns into something that you just wouldn't match together, right? It completely metamorphosizes. Most of the time they don't feed on the same thing. Sometimes they do, like with ladybugs, but that kind of works out in our favor. But you probably would never guess that larvae is going to turn into that adult. If you didn't know anything about biology, you were an alien from outer space, you never took a science class, you didn't observe anything in nature, you would never connect those two as the same thing. So they oftentimes look very, very different from each other, which is what metamorphosis means. It's a complete change in form. So they're truly changing their form from one stage to the next. A lot of times there's a lot of like ants, wasps, bees, things that live in colonies, social insects. We're not seeing that life cycle, but it's happening. All we're seeing is the adult form. But back in the colony, there is a queen laying eggs, and those are turning into larvae, turning into pupa. They're just hidden from us. So, so now we're getting into the part of looking at some orders of insects and being able to identify some of those orders. And one of the reasons is that common names vary among everybody. Everyone has a different common name for different things. And there are some insects that have like true common names, like they are designated, approved by the Entomological Society of America, but most of us aren't looking at that, right? We're calling it whatever our parents taught us to call it. So we'll look at how to identify them down to order. And it's based off of, and when you know what order it is, you know what kind of mouth parts they have, because they all should have the same mouth parts. You know what kind of life cycle they have, because that shouldn't change. And there are lots of species within the orders, but sometimes you can figure out, is most of this group good, is most of this group bad? So we'll look at the 10 that you're probably going to come across in your landscape. And we're missing a lot, right? Like we're not going to talk about dragonflies, walking sticks, really even praying mantises. But the 10 that you tend to see in your landscape that tend to cause damage or are good guys for you. So Orthoptera are the grasshoppers. These are, oh, I have, sorry. This is a metamorphosis. It's cracked, so just be careful. Metamorphosis thing. So Orthoptera are the hoppers. Grasshoppers, crickets, katydids. They all have their hind leg, whether they hop or not, like even a mole cricket, they just have these enlarged femurs that are meant for jumping. So if you see something with a big fat hind leg, it's or enlarged, because this one is not elongated, I guess I should say, because this one isn't really, it's not super duper fat and muscular, but it's definitely longer. So that's the look that they all have, or the shared characteristic. But these are grasshoppers, crickets, katydids. They all have chewing mouth parts, so they're going to cause holes in plants. They have an incomplete life cycle. The immatures also chew. They're also on the same plants, and they're all on it doing this at the same time. Here's some damage they do. They tend to, I noticed, that they'll feed on things that you are like waxy, that you don't think something would want to feed on necessarily. If that's happening, it's probably grasshoppers over something else. They tend to be nocturnal and feed at night, because most of them are at their peak in the summertime when it's hot, and so they are going to rest when it's warm outside and start feeding when the sun goes down. What else about them? Sometimes so you may not see them on the plant, but you might see their fecal material, and their damage looks very similar to caterpillars. But when caterpillars poop, it's little balls, and when grasshoppers poop, it's like little pellets. So you can look very carefully, like, especially, you know, where like a leaf kind of makes a little cup or something, it might be wedged inside there by the stem. But because their fecal material shouldn't be wet, so it's not like it's going to stick necessarily. It's going to have fallen down. Hemipterans, if you're going to come across an insect, I think you're probably going to come across a hemipteran or a beetle most of the time. And so Hemiptera is a really gigantic order of insects. They all have an incomplete life cycle. They all have piercing and sucking mouth parts, and they're either going to feed on plants or feed on blood, whether that's another animal, the blood of another insect, our blood. That's what they go after. So like bed bugs are actually true bugs, but they're really diverse in where they're found. Some are aquatic, some, you know, they're found on anything that you can think of, any organic matter, they're going to be found on it. They have an incomplete life cycle. That's the bug. And you can break them down into 3 suborders. The Coleorrhyncha are like almost all extinct, so you don't have to worry about that one. But the other little 3 suborders, if you kind of break it down a little bit more, then now they start to look more like each other. Versus Hemiptera is just a giant group. So Heteroptera, when I was in school, this was its own order, and then the others were their own order, and then we put them all together and made it harder. You'll notice that subword, I guess, Ptera, Orthoptera, Heteroptera, Hemiptera. Ptera means wing, hetero means different. So these guys have 2 different looks to their wing. The first part of their front wing is hard, and then the second part is soft, membranous. And their wings are attached like on their shoulders. So it's like if you had a blanket or a sweater on and you folded it over your body, you're gonna have a blank spot, right? You can't, if your shoulders are broad, you're gonna have a bigger triangle there. If you have small shoulders, it's gonna be a smaller triangle. So where these guys fold their wings over, they almost always make a triangle. And let's see, this one's here's a good one, right? You can see that triangle right there. He's got big, broad wings, so a big triangle. A really big triangle here. Is this one outlined okay? You can see that triangle right there. And then the other thing that you might notice is, especially like in this one, where the membranous part of the wings overlap, you get this different texture right there. So if you see a triangle on an insect's back, you're always looking at a true bug, some sort of a true bug. And they can be good or they can be bad. So here, this one, the triangle is black. And then, I don't know if y'all can see that big old triangle right there. This one's triangle is black right there. That one doesn't have wings. A lot of these actually don't have wings. These you can kind of see those triangles, right? So they can be little teeny tiny or they can be long. But if you see a triangle, you're looking at Hemiptera and Heteroptera. And Heteropterans either have long mouth parts. The difference between the 3 groups is like where is the mouth part, like between the eyes, closer to the middle or by its chin. And so these guys, their mouth part is like the top of their body or their head, not in the middle and not down below. But if they have long mouth parts like this, they go past the first set of legs, they're always going to be a plant feeder. They're going to be bad. If they have a shorter mouth part like this, a beak, it's going to be a bloodsucker in some way. So it's probably an assassin bug and it's good. And we'll look at other pictures too later on. But the other things that I notice, if you're not going to look at its mouth parts or you can't get to it, is the sapsuckers have fat heads. They don't really have a neck. But the plant feeders, the blood feeders have more of a skinny head so they can turn and look for their prey. So short mouth part, not 100% of the time, you're correct that it's a good guy. But the skinny head, you're right most of the time. And that's a lot easier to see than trying to find mouth parts. And then a Chinorrhyncha When I teach the 4-H kids this, I teach, if you look at them, when we get to the pictures of them, they all kind of have like an A shape to their head. The Echinoranca group also still has a triangle, but their wings are completely membranous. They don't have half hard and half soft. So these are like cicadas are the biggest ones, but then frog hoppers, tree hoppers, spittlebugs, plant hoppers, leaf hoppers, the hoppers, I guess. And these are completely all plant feeders. A lot of them can transmit viruses among things. If you can see the triangle right here in this spittlebug. If you imagine when he closes his wings, the cicada is going to have a little triangle too. And then this is a leaf hopper, you have a little triangle right there. But also, do you notice how like their noses are real pointy, so they look like an egg too? That's a tree hopper, that's a plant hopper, that's a leaf hopper. Tree hoppers have funny tops. Plant hoppers is pretty below, it's like a cool swing. And then leaf hoppers look like things, little bugs.
What is the bottom one on the right?
Tree hopper.
Oh,
Tree hopper. And then Sternoranca are the soft, sessile, squishy things. So it's all the S's. So this is mealybugs, whiteflies, aphids, all those little teeny tiny stuff. And they don't really have wings, and if they have wings, you're not going to see their triangle, if they even have them. They're usually very sedentary, very sessile. So the middle picture are aphids. Top left are whiteflies. Bottom left and top right are two different types of psyllids. And then the bottom right is a group of pictures of mealybugs and scales, and they look like aliens or a blob of wax that there's a bug underneath. I mean, they don't look, they seem very incredibly primitive, but there's stuff underneath there. Dicynoptera are the thrips. They are really abundant this time of year because they love pollen. And they feed on pollen, but then they will also, they primarily almost all feed on pollen. There are some predatory thrips, but then they will mess up the edges of your flowers and make your buds deform when they're trying to open up. These are only like the size of a hyphen on a page. Like they're so tiny. So if you're ever outside and you feel like someone's taking a toothpick and poking you, little pinpricks, it's probably thrips that are in the air, coming out of trees or whatever. And especially if you're wearing dark colored clothes, they are attracted to that. And they're curious. They have like raspy mouth parts, so they kind of scratch. They're not trying to get a blood meal from you, they're just kind of touching you. So feeding on flowers, feeding on leaves, they have those little fringed wings, itty bitty. And so if the wind blows or you mow, if your neighbor mows his field, then they just kind of catch in the wind and they'll make their way over to your area. So I used to always know when my neighbor was mowing, I needed to watch my roses because he was going to push those guys my way.
is that what they call no-see-ums?
No, maybe, but no-see-um is just kind of a blanket term for something that bites you and you can't see it. So probably some people say no-see-um and it may be thrips feeding on them. So on the leaf, you can't really see it in this image, but it's like a stippled effect, and then you'll have dark spots on the leaves. And then on the left-hand picture, and you don't ever see them because they're so teeny tiny. On the left-hand picture is real typical of what they do to roses, but they also feed on hibiscus and a number of things. They really like the type of flowers that have those like overlapping compact blooms, right? Because they're wedged in those little cracks. And so you'll know, right? You've probably seen this with roses. Before it opens up, it looks funny. And then when it does open up, it's just like deformed. And it's not pretty enough to put in a flower arrangement or anything like that. So, and those little buds are mite bombs. There's just, not mite bombs, but thrips bombs. There are tons of them inside of there. So they will cause the flower not to open up and look pretty, or they like damage the edges, right? And this guy's never gonna really open, it's just gonna always look tight and messed up like that. Best thing to do is to cut those off, put them in the bag, throw them in the trash can. Get it out of there so you get the thrips out. Because it's not gonna ever be pretty enough for either one. So if you don't have Hemiptera, you might have Coleoptera. That's most of the insects that you come across are going to be a beetle or a true bug. And just like you looked at the wings on the true bugs, to identify and see the triangle, you use the wings on Coleoptera. So Coleoptera have elytra, and then Hemiptera have hemelytra, half hard. So elytra are their front wings that are really, really hard and they protect their body. Make them really, that's why those June bugs can just like ram and hit the side of your window at night. Right? And then they move those hard wings and out come their membranous wings that they'll use for flight if they fly. But when they close those hard wings, it's like a clamshell and it makes a straight line down the middle. And yes, these guys have a triangle, but it's not the overflow. And they look hard and they usually look shiny and they just have a different look to them. So straight line down the middle, you're always looking at a triangle, you're looking at a true bug. Let's see. And they are a very, very huge, diverse group. There are more beetles than any other species of other insects. So they can be, dung feeders, they can be decomposers, they can be plant feeders, they can be predators. So you don't really always know who you're looking at. Predators are eating little bugs, like ladybug is a beetle. And then plant feeders, most of the plant feeders tend to be pretty small. So it's going to be little tiny holes. This is probably caused by flea beetles. Itty bitty tiny beetles will start out and it's like they're not strong enough to get all the way through the leaf, and so they make it little lacy holes throughout the leaf. And then either they're still working on it pretty hard or they grew up a little bit more and they are causing more holes. And beetles are interesting because their immatures are probably not what we're seeing damage on the plants. It's actually the adults that are causing the damage. So that's kind of easy because if we see them, we see holes, we can identify who it is. It's not their babies that are doing it. But it's really hard to identify your beetles. There are so many different types of beetles. They're so diverse. A lot of them look really, really similar. I think down here, this is one family of beetles. But the diversity is pretty broad. And then up here, these are two other different types of families. But and most of them don't have common names. So I don't know what species name it is, but what I might say is these guys look like they're in the family Chrysomeliid, which is the plant feeders, and so I'll just say the plant feeding beetle. But who really cares exactly what it is? And even experts a lot of times can't identify the beetle. I had a pest control guy who was getting these beetles in this structure, and he brought them into the office, and I keyed them out, and I got them down to the family. And the family of beetles was they were like mold feeders, fungal feeders, and I said, you probably have mulch up against it's clogging up the weep holes, and they're coming into this building. And he really wanted to know exactly what they were. So I sent him off to A&M, and the museum curator up there is a world-renowned beetle expert. And he said, well, I think they're in the genus this. He couldn't even tell me what species it was. So sometimes you can't even figure out exactly what it is. I say this because when you send me an insect and I say, oh, I think it's this, I don't know exactly what it is, I'm not dumb. And I ended up being right on what family it was, and it really didn't matter what the genus was because the answer was still the same. It feeds on the same thing. It was, figuring out what species didn't help him any more than it did when I told him what family it was. So Coleoptera, very diverse, and so their immatures are all going to be super different looks to them too. You might have real grubby looking ones, like a C-shaped grub. So we'll talk about grubs a little bit later, I think, but a grub is just an immature beetle. It doesn't mean that it feeds on your grass. That word doesn't mean anything about what host it's utilizing. It's just an immature beetle that is kind of curled up like a C shape. And they can be large and they can be small. Sometimes they're kind of more maggoty looking or mealwormy. Sometimes they're really active and real good hunters like a ladybug is. But you can kind of look at these three and say, which one do you think is the good one? I'd say that one because he looks mean and he looks like he's going to eat someone. You can kind of look at him and get an idea of what they might do. And then Neuroptera are all beneficial, which is nice. So Orthoptera, the grasshoppers and all those guys, usually plant feeders and bad. This Neuroptera group are all beneficial, and they're my favorite order if I had to pick a favorite order. They all have chewing mouth parts. They feed on some sort of insect. Their size are a little bit smaller. They're immatures, they have a complete life cycle. Their immatures up at the top there are just weird. They look like they belong deep down in the ocean somewhere on Mars. They just look very, very odd. And you're like, I've never seen anything like those except for maybe a doodlebug or a antlion. Because they're hiding from you. They're small and they're hiding. So owl flies and antlions, I think now they've separated, no, maybe, I don't know. They've separated this Neuroptera group out, and owl flies, or antlions, or I don't know. Some of them might be in their own separate thing. Let's keep them together though. So owl flies and antlions you usually find around porch lights at night, or you know, if you have like a light outside your house, in a light colored house, they tend to be attracted to that. Get them in your garage a lot of times. So antlions, we'll start with them, are the ones that make the caverns, and they kick out the dirt and make this little inverted volcano and then eat things that tumble into that. And you see its big old mouth parts usually come out to chomp on it. It will turn into this guy, which looks like a dusty, messy looking dragonfly or damselfly. It's like, but when it's a damselfly-esque looking thing, but like its antennae are not quite right, and when it flies, it's not quite right. It looks like a drunk damselfly. And then owl flies have bigger heads, bigger antenna. Their immatures are found on plants, but I have never seen an owl fly larvae in the wild. Like you really have to be looking for them. But you often will see the adults around, and that's an indication that you've got the good guys somewhere in your landscape. The best of them, I think, are these green lacewings. Go outside tonight when your porch lights are on and look around your porch lights, and you'll see those adults for sure. They're all over the place. They lay their eggs on these little stalks, and those can be on leaves, they can be on your door frame, they can be on your mailbox, they don't really care. It could be on a fence, a chain link fence. But she lays them on stalks because the first one that hatches will see everyone else hatching, because everyone hatches at the same time. And they'll eat them. They'll eat their brothers and sisters. So she lays them on stalks so that they're too busy figuring out how to get down and then start to eat each other. And so they're really, really ferocious, really good predators in that immature form. And they can bite you, but you so rarely come across them. But you will see the adults and you will see the eggs, and that tells you you've got them in your landscape. So you've got good guys helping keep things in check for you. And they love aphids and just little, you know, they're up in trees, they're all over the place, feeding on stuff that you didn't realize you had an issue with. And then Hymenoptera are the bees, the ants, and the wasps. They tend to be mostly beneficial. They can sting, but they're all predators, or they're predators or pollinators, so they're doing something good for us. There's a type called a sawfly that will feed on leaf material, but if you ignore them, they're all good. You can consider them all to be a good guy. So they usually have chewing mouth parts, always a complete life cycle. The difference between bees, ants, and wasps, bees are the hairy vegetarians. Someone described them as the hippies of the Hymenopterans because they're hairy, they're vegetarians, and there was a third one that I never remember. But bees are fuzzy, whereas wasps are naked, which means bees are better at pollinating than wasps are because they can pick up all those little pieces of pollen on their body. And there's tons of different bees. We always think about the honeybee and the bumblebee, but there are a million different other native bees that are out there. And they're all beneficial. Wasps are more naked. Some can be somewhat social, where this nest is going to die off and they have to start all over every year. Some are perpetual and truly social, like in a yellow jacket. And then some are solitary, like mud daubers or cicada killer wasps and tarantula hawks and things like that. They're all predators. They all have a benefit. If this is above your door and they sting you or somewhere, you know, it's in your shed or something, kill it, right? You don't want to get stung by it, but if you don't mind it there, it's eating something. I would say if you have yellow jacket nest somewhere, kill that because they can get real mean and they'll kill you first. So don't let it happen. And then there are some parasitic wasps too, and these are solitary, pretty short-lived, but they're really interesting and very, very host-specific. Some are host-specific to the species that they attack, and others are host-specific to like the order, or like they're only going after caterpillars or just Like these guys only go after aphids, caterpillars, beetle larvae, something like that. And so the adults come around and they lay their eggs inside of their host. Those eggs are going to hatch into larvae, kind of feed on it from the inside out. This guy only lays one, so one little aphid gets parasitized, but this might be parasitized with 30 eggs. And they're gonna keep them alive. They need this host to complete its life cycle or to continue to live so they inside can complete their life cycle. And then they'll emerge out. But if you're infested with 30 wasp larvae, you're not really doing much. And you're never gonna get to the point of developing all the way to reproduce yourself. So they help keep these insect numbers in check. And it's real, if you're into sci-fi stuff, do some research on parasitic wasps because it's really crazy. It's very, very sci-fi, very bonkers. And then flies, I think this might be one of our last, maybe not, so getting close to it. Y'all know because you have the notes. They have a complete life cycle. They have different types of mouth parts in this group. They might do sponging, they might do biting like a horsefly. I guess it's really just biting, sponging, a little bit of sucking too, like a hornfly stabs. But they're pretty diverse. So they could be a pollinator. There are a lot of pollinating flies. They could be decomposers. They could be blood feeders, and they can also be predators. So pretty much anything.
Is this what you call a mosquito wasp?
You might call it that. It's truly a crane fly.
So does it really kill mosquitoes like this? No.
No. Okay. No, that's incorrect, yeah.
Okay.
That, people do say that. They get called a mosquito hawk a lot of times, or a Texas mosquito. They neither suck blood or eat mosquitoes. They're crane flies. I've also heard them called mayflies. Oh, so a fly only has one set of wings, and then they have a second set of wings that are called halteres, or, called halteres, and they kind of help them maintain their balance. And that's why flies are very fast, move around and very, very zippy because they only have the one set of wings and then the balancing halteres. And then the other thing that they have that hopefully you'll notice, like mosquitoes are mosquitoes, and we kind of know what those look like, mosquitoes and gnats. And then in the middle are kind of the filth flies. On the right-hand side is a group called syrphid flies or hover flies, and these are pollinators and predators as adults, and as immatures, they're really, really fabulous predators. And they're usually the first ones to be out. They're out right now, but they're the first ones to be out before anything else kind of comes around in the spring. And they're the last ones that go to bed before it becomes winter. So they're helping really the early infestations and the late infestations. But they mimic, like a wasp or a bee or another bee. But what you'll notice about them, hopefully, especially with this group and this group, are the shape of the eyes. Flies have their whole head is made up of their eyes. And that's not what bees look like or wasps look like. It's like just goggles. And the other thing that you hopefully see are their little antenna air states. They have like a really fleshy piece and then a little skinny hair that comes out, but it's like a V coming off of their head. So if you see the V or you see giant eyes, you're looking at a fly and not someone else. And why would it matter, right? They're mimicking beneficial insects for you, so you probably leave it alone. And then they've got all different types of weird, we usually call their immatures maggots, but they can be very, very odd and weird shaped. This is like a typical maggot, right? The syrphid fly or hoverfly larvae would probably most resemble these two. They are like green blobs they're green blobs, and you can almost see like two lines down their back because they're almost completely translucent. But they'll just be hanging out on your plant material. What? Yeah, we're almost done. And then there's their little mouth parts. And then Lepidoptera, I think, is the last one. They have a complete metamorphosis, sucking or siphoning mouth parts. Caterpillars have chewing mouth parts. They're pretty, most of them. Those are all the adults. And so here's kind of the good news. if you're concerned that you're killing a caterpillar that's going to be a pollinator, the plant feeding caterpillars usually become some sort of a moth that doesn't even really have functioning mouth parts to pollinate. And they're usually very bland herbivorous. I think an exception is the tomato hornworm, which is kind of cool and interesting, but it also it pollinates as an adult and is a cool looking adult. So if it's ugly, just camouflaged and not remarkable, then it's not going to turn into anything remarkable as an adult. Probably is not going to turn into anything even that's pollinating or beneficial, which kind of is a little remarkable in itself that there are butterflies or moths that don't pollinate, but there are, or they don't even feed. Damage is chewing in some way, but it's diverse. They can feed on turf, plant material, vegetables, trees. They can make webs or they don't necessarily have to. And that's break time. And so we'll talk about how to kill them after the break. Y'all probably know how long your break is, right?
5 minutes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Molly, they're all yours.
Oh, okay. I don't know if this QR code will take you to the right place still, but if you want to be put on my email list to hear about like other countries, San Antonio is not too far from here. And our new office, we're only like 30 minutes away from this office, so it's not really that bad. But I also do a lot of virtual stuff too. So if you want to be put on my email list, my MailChimp, if you do that, if you do your camera, you do that QR code, it should take you to the Bear County website. Okay, oh, it went directly to it. Okay, good. And then it'll be put on there. And then the other thing, if you are really into bugs, myself and Wizzy Brown, who's in Travis County, she does what I do in Travis County area, she and I do a podcast. It comes out every other Thursday, twice a month, called Bugs by the Yard. And we got, I don't know what poll it was or who decided it was somebody. We're the #2 entomological podcast in America. Wow. So I know. There's not a lot of competition, but still pretty cool. Okay, so this section is all about how to kill the insects that you don't necessarily want. And do y'all have another break? Do y'all have a second break in between?
Yes.
You do at what time?
Whenever was based on your offer, whenever you needed it.
Okay, well, just so about what time is, how much time is left?
You have till 12:50.
12:50? Oh, I don't even.
You got a lot of time.
So, okay,
But if you need to leave it earlier, let me.
no, I don't. I just want to make sure I'm watching the clock and then so I can,
So what time's your break and I'll put it in time.
I don't know. I don't have one built in.
You say break and I'll hear you, okay?
Okay, so this is all about this idea of integrated pest management. So my official title is Integrated Pest Management Program Specialist. And I'm part of the IPM group, which is within the Department of Entomology. And it's all of us, right? And in an urban area, IPM is a little trickier, but you can do integrated pest management anywhere. We have a lot of guys that work in rural areas and are really specific. Like there's a guy in Lubbock and all he does is cotton IPM. And then the guy in Victoria, there's other things that grow, and so he does IPM of a number of different other things, rice and other things like that. But integrated pest management is this idea of controlling pests using all available control tactics to bring their levels to a level that you can control or that you can tolerate. And that is kind of the trick there, right? Like in cotton, there's a level that cotton can tolerate before economic damage occurs. There's a threshold that you have to hit, and you can say, if you have this many whatever insects are in cotton on a leaf, now it's time to go in and treat. So they do a lot of scouting and things like that. It's a little bit more fluid in your garden because what you can tolerate is different than what other people can tolerate. Everyone's tolerance is different. But we're not just using insecticides is the point. We're doing a lot of other control methods that we'll talk about to manipulate the environment, make it happier for your good guys, worse for your bad guys, whatever the case might be. And so What IPM is it's ecologically based, so it takes into consideration that we are not the only things on the planet. We're not just dousing everything, but we're, trying to keep things in check and level and the way that it should be. Considers all control tactics, so it's not just the use, like I said, of insecticides, but multiple other things. And you have to justify it, right? You got to monitor. You're not just guessing, but justify it. Like, for example, in the November time, we will often get aphids and crepe myrtles, and people want to get rid of the aphids because they drip the honeydew, and their cars that might park under it get really sticky, messes up sidewalks, makes it sticky, and they want to kill the aphids in their crepe myrtles. And for me, I don't think it's justified, because that time of year, the crepe myrtle is not going to bloom again. It's already spent. It is going to drop its leaves very soon anyway. And so killing the aphids, who really cares, right? Unless it's the only place that you can park, and you have to, you can spray it maybe with water. But killing the aphids is only going to make you feel better, but it really doesn't help or hurt the tree to get rid of them or keep them on it. IPM can be very personalized. It's also proactive, it's not reactive. So reactive would be only using insecticides after there's an issue, but we'll talk about, especially with cultural control methods, ways that you can just make it less likely that the insects are going to inhabit those areas. So it doesn't mean zero pests. You're going to have some pests, because if you don't have any pests, you don't have any good guys. And if you kill all of your pests and your good guys go somewhere else, when those bad guys inevitably come back in, it's going to take a whole lot longer for those good guys to come. So there has to be an ebb and a flow of things, and it's okay for there to be some bad bugs on your plants. You have to take that big step back and decide, is it still doing what it's supposed to do for me? Is it still blooming, producing, growing, looking green? But when it gets to the point where it's not looking good, that's when you want to step in. So we use this thing called the IPM pyramid, and it's, like rungs of a ladder, building blocks, all that kind of stuff. We're putting a lot of emphasis at the base of the pyramid with cultural control. Indoors, that would be a lot of sanitation type stuff, cleaning things up, whatever that means, so that the bad bugs aren't there. Physical or mechanical control is next. Biological control is your good guys, recognizing and utilizing them. And then you notice that pesticides are the tiniest part of the pyramid. Whatever kind of pesticide it is that you're using, whether it's traditional pesticides, natural, whatever it is, if you're doing everything underneath it, that's the least amount of input that you need, which is good. And sometimes you may not need it at all. So we do definitely want to be monitoring. You can use sticky traps for that in your garden. You can kill a lot of good things that way too. You can also get birds and other stuff on it, so it's not ideal. But having a good magnifier, bugs are tiny, so having a magnifier, a hand lens, a loupe, a jeweler's loupe, something like that. There are things that you can attach to your cameras now and take a picture and it zooms in really well. It's a lot easier to identify things these days. And then there's, of course, apps like iNaturalist and other things that are right sometimes, but a lot of times, always double check, like cross-reference it, Google it, and see if it's right, because I spend a lot of my day correcting things that people are freaking out about. So cultural control is the biggest chunk of that pyramid, and this is, you're manipulating the environment in some way, altering the landscape. All these things sound scary, but they're really not that difficult. To make it so that the bad bugs aren't so happy on those plants, or the good guys are much happier to come in. And so you kind of have to know the biology of what your pest is. So a lot of it is disrupting their life cycle. Where are they going to lay their eggs or find harborage or whatever it is when they're not feeding on my plant? And let's control those things, and then they're not in the area. Make them use alternate news sources. So first thing is to make sure you're purchasing things that are clean and healthy. When you go to the nursery, you do a plant swap, a plant sale, whatever, look at the bottom side of the leaves, because that's where all the bad bugs are going to be hanging out. So underneath that leaf, those are all aphids. I think that's an eggplant leaf. And if you were to take that home and plant it in your garden, it's only a matter of time before all the things next to it are going to be infested with aphids. They may not be able to fly, but they can sure move to plants, adjacent plants, pretty quickly. And if you have plants that are super heavily infested, remove them, get them out of there. Know when it's okay to get rid of stuff. Because when we do trials, if we have to start out with infested plants, All I have to do is find one plant infested, put it in the middle of 100 plants, and then I've got my 101 infested plants to start to study. So buy things that are already clean of stuff. When you go to the nursery, if there's, you bump it and there's whiteflies flying around, don't buy that time. Wait a couple weeks. A lot of times, it's like an outbreak and then it dies off. So let it go away and then buy stuff. Sanitation in the garden is really about weed control, but almost every single one of these bad bugs that we're going to eventually look at will spend their time either over winter, spend the colder months between your growing season, or mate on or find harborage and hang out on weeds. And so you can control the weeds in your beds and in your garden, but also think about that if you live on land or your neighbor is junky or you have an easement behind your house and you don't maybe want to put that vegetable bed up against that fence line because the fence isn't going to keep those bad bugs from coming in. And maybe that's the only place you have because that's where the sun is or the faucet's over there. And if that's the case, just know that the weeds are always going to give you intense insect pressure, so you always have to be looking and be on top of it. But controlling weeds is very hard. If you guys go to agrolifelearn.tamu.edu, that's our AgriLife bookstore where we have fact sheets and online classes and lots of things like that. There are 2 different publications, and so you can do in the search like a fall vegetable schedule or spring vegetables garden guide. So this is for veggies, but a lot of cultural control is planting the right thing at the right time. And so in the case of vegetables, you figure out what zone we're in here, right, the purple 1-3, and then it tells you when you should plant, when you can put the average planting when you put those plants in the ground. And that's really important because if you do it too early and you do it too late, the insect pressure is often too high. And so utilize that information. There's science that's backing that up. Somebody figure that out. Don't just go all willy-nilly and plant it whenever you want to. Do it when you're supposed to. Otherwise, you're going to have insect problems a lot of times. And as far as ornamentals and landscape things, that really doesn't matter so much, but maybe do some research if it's seasonal color that you're putting in. Do some research as to, is this plant going to die pretty soon? Maybe I don't buy all those snapdragons right now because it's not going to last that much longer, or whatever the case may be. But planting the right plant, we can do this for trees. The Forest Service has a tree selector, so you can put your county in. You can say, do you want a fast grower, a deciduous, an evergreen? You can give it different filters, and it'll spit out what its recommendation is. It'll also ask if you want native or non-native, I think, and it'll spit out what works best for your area. So don't plant things that don't belong here because it's always going to be stressed out, and stressed out plants always attract insects to it. Also, know when it's time to get rid of that plant. Nothing lives forever. Even live oaks have a finite life, right? Nothing is going to live forever. But in the case of vegetables, I think that's even more so. So established landscape plants can come back, right? Your flowers might die back and they come back from the root, and that's perpetual. But at some point, it's maybe not going to come back. So how long has it been in the ground? For trees, how old is that tree? I've lived in this house 45 years, and you look at the species of tree and it's only supposed to live 40, and you're wondering why it's dying, because it wants to die. It's ready to die, right? It's at the end of its life. So know your species and its life. But for vegetables, this can be hard because it's not like you plant everything today and it's all going to be harvested on this day. It's like this rolling calendar. But when you look at your tomatoes and they look pitiful like that, and yeah, you're like, oh, I still have a couple tomatoes on it. Go to HEB and buy those tomatoes. The bugs that you're bringing into this garden are now moving into your good stuff, and it's going to be a big problem. So know when the plant has given you all that it can give you. If it looks like that, it's probably time to pull it up. Unless you enjoy leaving it out and seeing what bugs come to it. But keep the plants happy and healthy. So water well. Don't let them be drought stressed because they're putting out these pheromones and these smells that those insects pick up on, and they're going to zoom in on those stressed out plants. If you have any kind of a plant, a tree, your turf, and it's always got insect problems, it's stressed. It's telling it this is a symptom of a greater issue. The insects are not the main reason. They're telling you something else is going on. So irrigation, proper irrigation at the times when you need to, and then fertilization to allow the plant to grow, and that often helps it outgrow the damage insects do. So fertilize, especially when they're young, and they need that boost. Give them all the resources that they need in order to grow and be happy and healthy, and then it's able to tolerate a lot of insect damage, and you don't have to go in and do much about it. And then you might also consider some plant-free periods, mainly for a vegetable garden, or crop rotation, right? So maybe you don't leave the bed fallow unless you've got certain insects in the soil, you kind of have to, but rotate by family. So don't have, you know, if you've got these 4 gardens, don't put your tomatoes right here and then next time you put an eggplant. Well, because the insects that are going after a certain type of plant will also go after others in that same family. So do some crop rotation, move your garden bed around, and even if you just have a long row of a garden, just if tomatoes are here, maybe flip them over there next time, put them in the middle. I know it's not that far for you, but it's a way for an insect to go. And then whatever's in the soil overwintering or close by, it's going to be a little confused. It's going to take a little longer to find it. And maybe that extra day is enough for that plant to get a little bit bigger so that the damage isn't as noticeable. So crop rotation is really, really important. And then so that's mainly cultural control. It's things you're probably already doing, but now just being really purposeful and thinking about it. Mechanical and physical control. There are lots of things you can do in the landscape. In our homes, it's window screens, closing our doors, air curtains when you go into HEB, that kind of thing. But outside, it could be like row covers, using tomato cages, so you're physically, or even like trellises for squash and other things, physically forcing those plants to grow up so they don't topple over where they get cracked and they smell good, but also you don't have all this surface area with the or contact with the soil, so the bugs are just going underneath it. So like if you're anything that grows as a vine, if you have issues with things year after year after year, you can try to put a horizontal trellis on the ground, so it's just off the ground a couple of inches. Let your squash trail on that, or your melons or whatever, and you get airflow, so that allows a lot of insects like aphids and things, if it's real humid and there's not a lot of airflow and it's congested in there, they thrive. But you're opening things up so that your good guys can get under there and feed on stuff. So using tomato cages is a form of physical or mechanical control. It's an IPM strategy, even though it's also a strategy for other things. And then between seasons, turn that soil over a little bit. You don't have to till your garden, you don't have to get really deep, but many insects will spend either the hot months or the really cold months, so when things are not favorable, in an egg or a pupa form in the soil, not super deep usually, and if you're just turning that soil over a little bit, you're exposing them to the elements, and then you hopefully have a smaller population going into that next season. So just, you know, condition the beds a little bit. Hand picking is very, very, very effective. It's tedious and it's labor intensive. But one good example is we were doing myself and our horticulture agent, David Rodriguez, at the San Antonio Botanical Garden has a children's garden program in the back. And AgriLife used to always kind of run the program. And so that one year, I said, I'm going to do a study on cabbage loopers. And there was a bunch of extra beds. It's like 2 acres back there with just beds for kids. And they come on Saturdays and they plant stuff and they get lessons and other things. Well, so I had 254 cabbages growing out there. And that was real hard to get rid of. We gave a bunch to the food bank, but we tried to put bows and give it to people at Christmas because we harvested it in December. And they weren't as appreciative as you would think they should. But we always have to have control plots, so that's where you don't do anything to it, so that if you want things to go awry there, so you can compare it to what worked and say this is how well it worked. Or if it wasn't a year where the cabbage loopers were bad, you know your study really wasn't effective. Well, one of the control plots was right next to, you know, if this was a bed, the control plot was right behind them, and those kids had been taught, get those little caterpillars off of your plants, hand pick the bugs off. And they thought they would help us out, and they turned around and they would also handpick off of our plants. And that messed up our whole study. I mean, that was one of the cleanest, prettiest plots. And these were you know, 50 little hands and really good little eyes and doing that, but they were only doing it once a week. And those cabbages were as big and as pretty as the ones that we doused the heck out of, right? So hand picking can be very effective if you're after it. You can also just do water sprays. A lot of these bad bugs, like the aphids, what I need to do is I need to add that faucet thing to my hose, and I just need to spray it every morning. Because if you think about when it, like the weird years where it rains, when it rains like consistency, like every week or 2 weeks, we don't have a lot of insect problems until the faucet turns off, because it's washing a lot of those little bad bugs off. So it's not killing a ton of them, but it's keeping the populations down. So if you have drip irrigation, you have little sticky bugs on the plants, just take it with you're not gonna bust the plant to pieces, right? But a fairly sharp blast of water or a shower of water, replicate rain, and wash those guys off. And you can do that every day, right? You're not really gonna get resistance. Yes, ma'am.
I have a mint plant that was taken over by ants, and so I just keep dousing it with water and moving the pot and moving the pot.
What do you mean taken over by ants?
Like ants were coming out of the
Soil?
Of the soil, yes. So
They're not hurting your mint plant.
They're not?
eating it. Mm-mm.
No.
They're aerating that soil.
Okay.
So you can leave them alone.
I'm trying to figure out how to get rid of them. I'm trying to shake it all loose and totally start over.
You could use a bait in there, probably.
could put
Yeah,
a bait
yeah.
on
You could do
top.
like come and get it. Come and get it is because I don't think you could put any of the others in the pot with something you would consume. But
Right.
come and get it. You can put like in vegetable bed. So I'm assuming you can put them in an herb pot. Yes.
But if ants are in any pot, it's okay.
Yeah, they're not plant feeders. Ants are not plant feeders. But they just like that wet soil and they're aerating it for you.
But the red one, the big one, the.
Now, leaf cutter ants, yes, but they're not gonna be in your pots. Yeah.
Because some of the plants that come into it.
Leaf cutter ants will strip your leaves, yes. But ants in your plants, ants in your pots, don't worry about it.
That's a new one answer, what are you doing there?
Yeah, the little ones don't worry about it. Some other mechanical, physical controls. They call that reflective mulch, they call it mulch, but it is not mulch, it's just plastic, right? And it's not really environmentally friendly. But that reflectiveness, it does a couple of things. The reflection bothers like thrips and whiteflies and other things, but it also keeps things that want to burrow into the soil from being able to do that, or even coming up from the soil. But using mulch, especially depending on what the insect is, or the plant is that might attract certain insects, using like a finer, like a straw mulch or a finer mulch so that it's harder for them to get through that, to get into the soil, that can actually be a physical form of control. But it also helps it, retain moisture and cools down the temperatures in the soil, and so it's also making the plant happier and healthier. So it does a twofer. Other physical mechanical control using row covers when, not just for when it's cold, but like when you have high populations of certain insects that are coming in to feed on stuff for just a short period of time. A lot of people will do these little plant collars. This is a lot of times for like caterpillars that might be coming up. Yes, they can still crawl over, but it makes it a little harder for them. People will do like toilet paper rolls, but those disintegrate so fast, so I would do a coffee cup or an aluminum can. It's good for slugs, for roly-polies, snails, during wet years. I don't know that I would, today, I wouldn't worry about it this year, but during the wet years, it's something to think about. Because these these seedlings and these really young transplants, they are juicy and tasty. And one leaf eaten off of it, and now they can't photosynthesize. So these young plants are the most vulnerable and where you really need to be watching and letting them get established. Once they become established, you can kind of back off. So a lot of your effort's going to happen early on, and then you can kind of back off anymore a little bit. Biological control is using your good guys to help reduce those pest populations. And there are releases, augmentation, and you can release things. That would be direct manipulation. But really the best thing for us in our open systems, like if you had a greenhouse and a lot of the same thing, or you have acres and acres of something, those bad bugs are all there, and so those good bugs are all going to stay put if you release them. But we don't have that. We have an open system. So you release things and they leave. So instead, indirect manipulation is better, and that's just where you use like targeted insecticides, target your pests. There are products with caterpillars that you can use that only kill caterpillars, so your big guys are fine. Or just, cut back on what you're using, or use things that don't have long residuals. So you might use like insecticide or soap, and your beneficial insect population might crash a little bit, but it's going to rebound because when they come back, they're still not encountering that insecticide. Because it's not there anymore. It's no residual. So there's tons of good guys, but here's some of the good guys that we have. Of course, one are ladybugs. Let me see if I have any in here. And I know we all know what ladybugs look like, but there's some. What are these? Some of it. So, I'm sorry, that is going to somehow make its way over to you guys. I know you know what the adult looks like, but a lot of people do not know what the immatures look like. And will have a lot of gardeners that will say, oh, I killed a bunch of those because I thought they looked mean. If it looks mean, leave it, because that means it's eating something. But they're very spiky. Their eggs are usually little yellow eggs that you'll find somewhere on the plant, and then they're eating aphids and other stuff that are out there in the garden. They're always red with black spots, or maybe black with red spots, or some variation, right, like a yellowy. They're never green. Those are a bad bug. And you hear, I see on social media all the time about the Asian lady beetle and how kill it, it's a bad ladybug. There's no such thing as a bad ladybug. The Asian lady beetle was introduced to help reduce aphids in some crop in California. And right now it's eating bad bugs for us. But in the winter it might come in, it has a weird, because of where they came from, they overwinter as adults. And like usually up in the mountains, right? Well, we don't have that. And so they overwinter in cracks and separations in our siding or in the soffits of our house. And then on warm days, they all come out because we have those in January and February. And people say, well, they bite. Every ladybug can bite. I will bite. If you put your finger in your mouth, I'm going to bite you. They're curious, right? You're warm and they're like a bird. They use their mouth to feel where they are. So they're not biting you to suck your blood or anything like that. They're just, and it's not comfortable, but they're not bad. They're not necessarily bad. And they're not doing it to be mean to you. They're just doing it. We already kind of talked about lace wings. I've got, here's a lace wing. I've got a lace wing. It says nymph on here, but it's actually a larvae. And you can see how teeny tiny they are. And my adult lace wings are very faded. They look white, but they are very, very green. Even that, well, my angle is different, but they're like lime green, really, really pretty. But you can see how, and they're very dainty. We call them we call them garden fairies in our office. They just kind of float and fall. And they're not scary, right? They don't look like they're going to come up your leg or anything like that. Praying mantises, of course, are good guys. They are not real specific on what they feed on. They feed on anything. And you can't buy the egg cases and release them, but they'll usually just kind of scatter around. But they're, if you see egg cases stuck to like, underneath your rock or something like that, or on your rock, leave it alone. See what comes out of it. They're usually pretty cute. You see adults feed those guys alone too. That's the egg case.
Egg case?
Yeah.
For them.
Yes, they lay an egg case. Yeah. It's called Oatica. And then we did talk about assassin bugs. I've got a bunch of them here. And hopefully what you notice in the variety of them is the skinny little head that they have. I tried to pin them sideways or kind of put them in sideways so you can see that little beak that they have. But the beneficial assassin bugs, beneficial true bugs, have the short mouth part, very, very short. And they usually have a very skinny head versus the bad guys with that kind of webbed neck. They don't really have a neck. Their head just goes right into their body. And then the mouth part's very, very long. It's going to pass the first set of legs. So they just kind of all have you just get used to the way that they look, and you can make a fairly good guess from a decent picture. You can send it to me and I can make I can guess for sure. All spiders are good. There are only two spiders that are medically important to humans. So every other spider in your garden, if it's making itself known to you, it's good. These spiders that are medically important are hiding from us most of the time. They're not making a web and exposing themselves. And no spider is going to jump out and get you. So if you really want to know what it is, you got to get closer and take a picture of it. Because I'll get a picture of like someone from here taking a picture of a web at the window. If you're that curious, get braver, because I can't. I have no idea. But spiders are in your garden are all going to be beneficial. There are some that make webs and they're collecting things in their webs. There are others that are going to be on the plants and they're opportunistic. So they're also going to get pollinators and other things, but they know where the bugs are, so they're hanging out inside your plants. I always like it when I cut flowers in my garden and then I take it and I lay it on the counter to make arrangements, and spiders will come out of it, and I know, okay, I'm not using too many insecticides, they're helping. And it doesn't bother me. I don't mind having spiders in my house. My kids don't at all, but part of the reason why I like it is to hear them scream sometimes. If they're there, people will say, well, how do I get rid of spiders in my house? Well, why are they there? They have to eat insects, so let's control the insects that they're feeding on. And then you can control the spiders.
Oh, yeah.
This is that syrphid fly. So here's a syrphid fly adult, and this is their little larvae there. They've got like carcasses of aphids as they're going past. So they're kind of like a carrot-shaped green, and you see that stripe kind of down the middle. Usually it's almost like two stripes, but very fleshy, blobby. I bet if we went and looked at some plants, we would definitely see them. To me, the way that they move, like a caterpillar, when it moves, it stays its same length, right? It might inch, but these guys like mush into themselves and then stretch out is how they move. So if you watch them a little bit, you might see that and be able to identify them. Wasps tend to be good predators controlling caterpillars. If you see them on your plants, they are either going after something, or if it's flowering, they're getting the nectar because the nectar is sweet for them. So that's, we talked about cultural, physical, a little bit about biological, because there's a lot of other good guys. We're going to spend most of the time probably talking about pesticides. And so when I use the term pesticide, don't get turned off by it. Like if you like using natural or organic, whatever that means for you, it's still a pesticide. Insecticides kill insects. Pesticides kill pests. So organic products, natural products are still insect. Technically, your 2 fingers smashing it is an insecticide as well. So it's just, I'm using it as the definition that it is. Anything that kills, mitigates, or repels a pest works. And there are different types of insecticides. I would say that we probably, maybe the best way to kind of categorize them is naturally derived ones. So what organic means different things to everyone. Organic to some is that it's already organic certified, but there are some things that you would think are more organic that are not. So naturally derived are those that are coming from natural sources, right? Like plants, pathogens, byproducts, microorganisms, that kind of thing. And we like naturally derived because the residual is really short. They're not necessarily safer for us to put our bodies around, but the residual is very short, and so they don't last in the environment, so we don't affect non-targets as much. We're not killing off our good guys. Lizards, birds, other things hopefully won't come into contact with them, or at least they're not coming into chronic contact with them. And then synthetic products are those that we figured out how to make in a lab. And they may or may not last longer, but they tend to. We have more options where the residual is going to be a little bit longer. And so, termiticides, right? Those are synthetic, and we want them to last a long time because we want them not to eat our house up. I love this picture because it's a lot of things, but a lot of things that we wouldn't see today. But it also gives an important message, right? Like today we would never, even if it was essential oil, mothers wouldn't let their children run through that naked. So they're at the beach during the day spraying with DDT. And if you read the little sign that says powerful insecticide harmless to humans, that's true. Y'all think it's not, but it hasn't been proven to be a carcinogen, or at least correlated with it. And it is a very powerful insecticide. But what DDT was the residual, the half-life was forever. it's still in, you know, in grass and other things, and then a cow eats it, and a cow gets it in their fat bodies, and then we eat that hamburger, and we have a portion of it in us. And then we have a baby, and it's in our baby, so it just doesn't go away. It's forever and ever and ever. And that was its big problem. We overused it, we got resistance, but it's in everything, and that's not good, right? We affected a lot of non-targets that way. So we don't want to just rely only on using insecticides, whether it's organic or natural or not. It's still we can still get resistance, or things stop working as well. We can still hurt our non-targets. I get asked all the time, what can I use so I don't hurt my butterflies? Nothing, because an insecticide kills insects, and even your good guys are insects. So it's less about what you're using and how you're applying it, and avoiding your good guys, and recognizing when you actually need to, and it's not necessary. So if we do only use insecticides, we're going to get resistance. I see this almost every single summer where people have flea problems, and they say, I've been treating every day, and the fleas are bad. Well, yeah, no, they're super fleas, and I don't know what you're going to use to try to control them. If it says, don't, you know, that your interval to reapply is 7 to 10 days, wait 7 to 10 days. If it says mix 1 ounce with a gallon of water, don't add half of, 2 ounces, because it's not going to work twice as well. You're wasting money, you're wasting time, and it's not going to be as effective, and you're going to get resistance. But when we only use insecticides, we're also, affecting those non-targets, whether it's beneficials, birds, anything, right? I know we often will get secondary pest problems. There are times when people will have major issues with certain bugs, and I'm like, I don't even know how you managed to make that happen. Because it means you killed off all your bad bugs, but also all your beneficials. And there are some that will come in and they're like secondary problems. They're never really a problem. But when you don't have anything to keep them in check, and that's not good, because we also don't necessarily know what to use to control those things. So insecticides tend to come in a number of different formulations, but the formulation is like how it looks, right? Whether it's a dust, it's a foliar, or a systemic. So dusts are dusts. They're combined with some sort of mineral. It usually is meant to like touch their body, clog things up, gum up their mouth parts, or they rub it into them somehow. A liquid or a foliar application, you tend to apply it to the plant and hope they crawl across it or directly to them. And then systemics could be a granule, it could be a liquid, it could be whatever, but you put it you apply it to the soil, or like for a tree you would apply it usually says like along the drip line, and then it goes into the roots of the soil, or into the roots in the soil and through the plant. So it's systemic, it's within it. And now anything that chews on it or sucks the sap from it is going to get a lethal dose of that insecticide. So you can do this trees, like landscape plants. I don't know that there's anything labeled for vegetables, because you don't want to eat that, right? It's going to last in the plant, depending on what you're using and what type of plant it is and how fast its growth is. It could be 3 months, it could be 12 months, it could be a while. But systemics you have to be careful with those if it is a flowering plant, because that systemic could also be in the pollen and the nectar, and so it can affect our pollinators. But if that plant's not pollinating, or it's not flowering and it's gonna die, then sometimes I argue, well, do you want it to be there for it next year, or do you have to kind of pick your poison, I guess. And then other formulations, we have lots of different baits. If I have the option to use a bait, I'm going to, because it's easy. You're putting out far less insecticide, like concentrated amounts, because you're attracting them to the bait. You're baiting them to it. They're going to feed on it. It's usually meant for social insects, so they'll tell all their little buddies, right? And there's baits for cockroaches, for ants. There's cricket baits. There's termite baits. If I have an option for a bait, I would prefer to use that over other things, because I'm not, with the other stuff you're spraying and you're hoping they crawl across it. With baits, if there's no other food source, then they're going to be attracted to it. Granular applications are like slow release medication, right? Usually you're putting, this is for things in the soil. So I wouldn't use a granular thinking you're going to control fleas, because they're probably not, well, that's not true, that's incorrect. I would use a granular to control chinch bugs in your turf, because they're on the grass, they're not in the soil, so they're not contacting it. Even though you'll see granulars that are labeled for chinch bugs, so you know, it's gonna bind to the soil usually pretty tightly, and then whatever is crawling through there is probably gonna sink into it. And then aerosols are just a fine, fine mist. That's better for mosquitoes, really, because you have little teeny tiny droplets that give you a better application so that they can hopefully touch it with their little teeny tiny feet and die. Okay, and so you gotta talk a little, if you're gonna talk about pesticides, you have to talk a little bit about the label. Label has all sorts of information on it. You hear this all the time, or you will. We always say label is the law, label is the law. But I mean, none of us actually read the label. And we certainly don't follow the label, but you wanna try to. The front of the label is, or the package gives you minimal information. So flip it over. The label is that thing that kind of rolls out and moves. And these labels are getting bigger and bigger, mainly because it's not like this is your section for tree pests, this is your section for vegetables. Now it's all combined, so you can get one packet, one container that you can treat vegetables, trees, turf, all sorts of stuff with. So there's sections of how much and how you use it. But on the front, you'll have like a trade name, a commercial name. Those change all the time. So if you call and say, I use Touchdown Total, I don't have any idea what that is. But look for the active ingredient. And that is a lot easier to memorize and to know. So even in fact sheets, when we get to the management part of specific insects, I'm giving you the active ingredients, not trade names, because the list could go on, and I'm not going to include, there's no way I could include everything. But on the back side of the label, there's a lot of things that you might see. So I would always check out, like, what's the PPE? Almost everything will say a long sleeve shirt and pants, and absolutely everything says shoes plus socks. Well, how many of us do it in our flip-flops or our Crocs and we're not wearing it, right? I do too. But that's what we should be using, because we're spraying and it's certainly getting on our skin, and our skin is how we're absorbing a lot of this stuff. But also, if the option is between two things, and one is like wear a respirator and wear this and that, and the other just says that, I'm probably going to go this route, right? There's something about this one, if it's meant for the same thing, that hopefully is safer for me. There's also information about storage and disposal, and this is kind of unique because it's not giving the height of the temperature. It's giving not to be below 32 degrees. We don't really get that way, but you'll be surprised at how many things will say not to be stored over 85 degrees. Well, all of our garages and our sheds are getting that hot in the summertime. So something that you bought last year, or yeah, I guess this year would be fine, right? But say you bought it, anyway, if it made it through a summer, it's probably not good anymore. It's probably not effective any longer. And then another thing is disposal. So some products will say to triple rinse it. That doesn't, all you have to do is empty it or get it pretty darn close to being empty, fill it with some water, slosh it around, and use it in the same way that you would, and do that 3 times, and that's a triple rinse. And then usually it'll say, like, put a knife in it or something. Then you can throw it in your trash can, and you don't have to wait for like a hazmat kind of, or a hazardous waste day. I would also, because of these products all being meant for multiple things, like this one's vegetables, flowers, small fruit, foliage, ornamental, and shade, the application rate, if it's not ready to use, might be different of how you mix it. Sometimes it'll tell you to add a soap. That's not to make it insecticidal soap, but to make it stickier, the surfactant. And application frequency is important too. So, 7 to 14 days, don't do it at day 5. Wait 7 to 14 days. And if it is something we consume, look and see when you can harvest it. When we did that caterpillar study, the BT that we were using, it was BT, so that's organic. It did not allow us to apply a week before harvest. So even organic or natural products, figure it out. Like, don't spray today and then say, oh, that thing looks like it's ready in 2 days. Probably can't take it, don't want to eat it. And you'll notice, like, for the things we consume, the application is longer. You have to wait in between versus the things that we don't consume. And one thing that's missing that you'll probably find for the consumable product or consumable crops is how many times you can apply in a growing season. Even BT, it gave us 5 times in this growing season. So that might change. In Texas, things are ready a lot sooner, but that may change. Oh, maybe I'm going to wait 14 days instead of 7 before I apply. So I have more options to treat later on. So when you're looking at insecticides or pesticides to use, we want to try to choose those that are more environmentally friendly, you're less impact on target organisms, hopefully aren't going to have that long residual in the environment. And so those that are like that, and as we go through these, a lot of these you're going to say, well, this is what I consider organic, right? But those would be, those considered low toxicity, baits, botanicals, and then micro-dried. And low toxicity products are insecticidal soaps and oils. So, which are, you think, well, they're not truly organic because they don't have carbon in their chemistry, but are they natural? I guess. Maybe, it's a soap, is that, maybe not, but it is something that a lot more people feel comfortable using if you don't like using the more traditional insecticides. So the idea with them, I will use soaps before oils because I'm really worried that I'll burn the heck out of my plants with oils. So be careful with that. But insecticidal soaps work really well. It removes the waxy layer on the insect. The thinner the exoskeleton, so like aphids, softer bodied things, have not a lot of wax, and so they die for sure. If it's beetles, it's probably not. Their waxy layer is so much thicker, they're going to have to be soaked up a whole lot, right? So aphids, whiteflies, mealybugs, those sessile, soft, stuck on the plant things, very effective. Can also control caterpillars because they're softer, but there is no residual. It has to physically touch them, and then they will eventually die. You don't get the thrill of the kill. They don't die immediately, but they will eventually die from it. And they dry out, they desiccate, and it's an awful death, and so you feel better. You feel better. The oils, so insects don't breathe through their mouth like we do. They have holes in their bodies, and the oils will clog up those holes, and then they suffocate, so that's a terrible death. But it's like, it's Texas, and it's very, very sunny, and you can burn the heck out of your plants, especially really tender ones. So I am the worst at, when you read the label of anything, including like a cleaner for your carpet, do a small spot first. No, I'm going in. I don't have time for the small spot. I bought it today. In that case, you might want to just try it out, right? So, and then there's different oils. There's horticultural oil and there's dormant oil, and you use them at different times of the year too. But read the label because it will also say like not to use it at certain temperatures, and just be careful. Don't blame me if your stuff gets burnt. I tried. No residual, very soft body things, but can be really effective and easy to use. You just have to apply it where they are. And then these things like diatomaceous earth, silica aerogel is used usually by your pest control guy. It is meant as it's a flushing agent, so they might apply it, like take your plate off and apply it back there, because they have put the pesticide over on this wall. So they're just trying to flush the cockroaches or whatever over to where the insecticide was applied. But it also, it's like the packets in, your medicine or whatever. It sucks the moisture out of it. Diatomaceous earth, boric acid, sulfur, they don't have carbon in their chemistry, but they aren't more natural, right? So they're inorganic in that means. So silica aerogel sucks the moisture out, pushes things, they're irritated by it. Diatomaceous earth is abrasive, so anything with an exoskeleton is going to cut that, and they'll eventually dry out, including scorpions. The only thing with diatomaceous earth is that once it's in 20% humidity, it gets clumpy, and it doesn't unclump itself, right? It's kind of like powdered sugar. I guess you could sift it and maybe it would get less clumpy, but that's a lot of work. So you put it outside and then the sprinkler hits it, or it's a hot, humid day and it's not really effective. At 20%, its efficacy drops, and the more wet it gets, the worse it is. So it's great here in the summertime when it's really, really dry, but once it gets wet, just know you gotta reapply it probably. Boric acid is usually used for like cockroaches, maybe ants and silverfish. It has to be consumed. I would only use it inside. I don't think it's labeled for use outside. It can affect the kidneys of other animals. And we think it's a stomach poison. We're not really sure how it works against them. And then I'm not sure what sulfur does, but it does something to them. But it smells. And it stinks. The microbe-derived products I think most of y'all would consider these to be organic, and a lot of them are OMRI certified. So BT is one. BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, has two subspecies, I guess, or varieties. There's Karstachii or Kar something, and then Israeliensis. BTI affects only the gut of flies, and BTK only affects the gut of caterpillars. And it will say like BT worm killer or, you know, mosquito ducks or whatnot. So for BTI, you've got mosquitoes, you have a bird bath, you have a koi pond, you have something, and the mosquitoes are in there. You can throw that in that $1 million horse's trough, and it's not going to affect anybody else's stomach except for the flies, but only flies. So like, you know, if any other flies laying its eggs in there, if they are, you don't want that anyway. But it only controls mosquito larvae, and they have to consume it to get an upset stomach, and then they die. And then BT, worm killer, only affects the gut of caterpillars, but all caterpillars. So you don't want it to drift onto your milkweed, or, you know, if you've got a garden where you've got host plants for them. But if you've got holes in plants and you think it's caterpillars, but you're not really sure, you can spray that, and if you're still seeing a ton of holes weeks later, you didn't kill anyone else, but it wasn't caterpillars. So those are nice because they're incredibly host specific. They're the only two examples, I think, on the planet that don't hurt another thing, a non-target organism. Spinosad, and what it is it's a bacteria, and they get dysentery and they die from that. From their gut actually explodes inside them. And then spinosad, but so like with BT worm killer, they have to eat. So again, it gets worse before, so if you spray it, don't expect perfect plants tomorrow. It's gonna eat, you want to see little more holes because that means they're gonna kill. And then spinosad is a contact as well as they can consume it. But this is an example of an organic natural product where we see resistance with thrips. It was like this miracle drug in the aughts. The early 2000s, we were so excited about it, and we've overused it like crazy, and so we're seeing resistance with thrips and roses especially. So overusing things, even if it's natural, you can have problems with it. But it is, it's like bacteria is fermented, and it's that byproduct, and I think it's a stomach poison. It's also a contact insecticide. A lot of other stuff is on the label. There are flea control medications with spinosad, and then it starts with a C. I don't know if it's called Conserve or something else. And it will like knock out your beneficials, but they'll rebound. It doesn't, because there's a very little residual, so they're able to come back in. And then I mentioned I like using baits. There's lots of different options for bait. So the bait is some attractant for whatever you're trying to kill. If it's cockroaches, there's something in it that they have done studies and figured out what is the most palatable mixture to bring cockroaches to. Same thing for ants. And you'll find that there's different baits. There's carpenter ant bait, fire ant bait, just ant bait. It's what those guys specifically prefer to feed on. And so you have this bait that is, so in the case of fire ant bait, it's corn grit soaked in soybean oil, which is the attractant, and then also the insecticide is in there. And so the corn grit is the vehicle to take it back into the colony to get fed to everyone, but it's not what's killing it. So you throw out corn meal, it's not killing it. If you think it is, I'm not going to argue with success, but it's not. And then I'm not sure what the fire ant stuff is just, the cockroach stuff is just a sweet something. I don't know. I've never eaten it, so I don't know. I assume it's sweet. But if you have the option for a bait, it's a good one to use because you are putting out far less insecticide because you're not just hoping they come across it or they eat that bit of the plant. They're attracted to it and they're going to take it out of the environment. They're going to tell their buddies it's going to get fed. More of those bad bugs are going to feed on it. So you get a greater, you get a bigger kill because they want it, hopefully. If it's still good. That stuff has a shelf life too. And read the label and see how old it should be or how it should be kept. I don't know about the cockroach stuff or the things that come in those syringes, but I know with ant baits, if it doesn't smell, especially with fire ant bait, because it's got soybean oil, if it doesn't smell like a potato chip, it's old, throw it away. So if you had it, if it's been in your garage for a while and you open it and it smells chemically or plasticky, it's not palatable to them any longer. So if it's not working, if your bait's not working, get fresh bait. And then there's a lot of different botanicals. Neem oil is one that a lot of people use on your plants. That's probably the most easily accessed one. Neem actually has some locally systemic properties to it, so you can spray the plant and not like, it doesn't go into the roots and it's all throughout, but like in a little patch where you spray that's inside the plant, and so you get a little bit longer residual in that regard. Pyrethrum and pyrethrins are from the chrysanthemum flower, and it's like the way that they're made, and I forget what the difference is, and it doesn't really matter. But pyrethrum and pyrethrin are natural, coming from the chrysanthemum flower. There's a lot of extracts, essential oils that would be botanicals too. And then one really good example of where nature isn't always the best option is rotenone. Rotenone is a natural product, but it's hard to find rotenone any longer, especially as an insecticide. It may still be used in some cases as an herbicide, but it has been correlated, not linked, and doesn't cause, but there's a correlation with it and like the ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, just awful things. Probably because it's used as an herbicide, and we see this a lot like in golfers, because they take up their tea and they put it in their mouth, and then they're consuming small, minute amounts. But golfing is a lifelong sport, so years and years and years of it. A rotenone also, if it a little bit gets into a water system, every fish is going to be dead. So natural stuff may not necessarily be more environmentally friendly. Like if I told you the best way to kill insects is to spray it with poison ivy, we wouldn't be doing that, So nature can be really nasty. Nature has some nasty stuff, and we know that. Okay, this is not the end of it, but this is a good time for a break.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. 5 minutes, right? So I did have a break built in.
There is a bug on the wall.
I have a question, that's sorry.
Everything else was very broad, right? Now we're going to get into like some specific insects and what you can do about them. And I also tried to group them, I think, at least when we get into vegetables, by family. So like tomatoes, well, you can apply that probably to eggplants and peppers and other stuff too. Or maybe I did it by plants, I'm not really sure. But starting out with turf pests, so that, because not everybody takes the master gardening class in the vegetable garden. You might be, a flower gardener or something else, but most of us have turf. So if you look at, first of all, our poor, sad, crying bug over there, because everybody, no matter what's happening to your grass, if it doesn't look good, it could be August and it hasn't rained in 18 months and you haven't watered in 12 months, and your grass looks bad, and you're always going to blame an insect. And they get blamed for absolutely everything when it's hardly ever their fault. So of course it's just, if you leave today and you learn one thing, it's that most of the time it's not the bug's fault. But if you look at what things can actually harm turf, there's really not that many of them. The big ones are white grubs, chinch bugs, and fire ants don't hurt the turf, but they're in the turf and they aren't you don't always want them there. Sometimes sod webworms, outbreak years, army worms, and if you have a really like a sandy soil, then mole crickets. But that's it. White grubs and chinch bugs are really all that you've got. So white grubs are really 2 to 3 specific species of beetles that lay eggs in the turf, and then their larvae feed on the turf. They use turf as their host plant, only turf, nothing else. There are hundreds of species of beetles that look just like those two. So just because you're finding them at your porch lights at night doesn't mean it's the species that's going to be laying eggs in your grass. So for most of us, we don't have a golf course. We can do a wait and see approach, right? Like, are they actually going to cause problems? We don't have to preemptively treat. But they are specific just to turf. And they're not very big. They're very, very small. They're on a quarter. All of them are on a quarter, right? So not very big. They're only about ½ an inch or small. They're very small. So big grubs are not these guys on steroids. They're a totally different species. Damage they do is kind of atypical. It looks like drop damage, it looks like a number of other things. It's just irregular dead spots. But there's nothing about it. You wouldn't really look at it and say, yeah, you definitely have white grubs. And if someone comes and says, yep, you definitely have white grubs without digging it up and looking for them, then they're lying. You might have grass that, because they're feeding on those roots, it's real easy to just peel it back because there's nothing holding it into the soil. So that would be fairly typical of them, but from the surface, looking at the grass, there's nothing, not one thing that you would notice. I need to change this. I need to make a note to change this because we had our marketing, Marcom or whatever people do like an infographic for Texas. So this one is from Purdue. So we kind of have to shift the time. Like don't look at the months quite as much, right? So if we're in today, we're in the beginning of the spring. For us, our white grubs right now, and the life cycle really makes sense with timing, why you see damage when you see it, why there's only a window to treat for it, and why it's a waste of your time to go outside that window. So our grubs are probably more like in the April and May stage right now, where they're either real big grubs that are getting ready to become pupa or they're already pupa. Pupa don't feed, big grubs don't feed either. So damage to your turf right now is not caused by grubs, whether you see them in there or not. So they're up high in the soil but not feeding. And then probably next month or so, because it's also a little bit warmer this year, so even within the year that can shift, and also where you are in the state. So the next month or so, these adults are, and these look green, but ours are brown, are going to fly out of the air and they're going to mate. And that usually happens May to June. That's why they're called May beetles or June beetles. They're going to lay their eggs on the surface of the soil. And these little teeny tiny babies from June to May and June, and maybe a little bit in July, these guys are going to be the hungriest and doing all the damage. In our area of Texas, kind of south central Texas, most of the damage is occurring mid-June to mid-July. By August, they're bigger, fat and big, and they're starting to migrate deeper into the soil to prepare for winter time, even though it's not, we're close to winter. And so when we're in our fall months, they're so deep into the soil that damage in the fall is not due to these guys because they're not actively feeding. The problem with all the bad damage, most of their damage happening in mid-July is that by August when we see it, that's also when our grass is really stressed out. It's very, very hot. And so is it a combination of other factors? Is it the other factors and they just happen to be there? There's no telling, right? So most of us treat outside of that window of mid-June to mid-July and it's not effective. It's a waste of insecticide. I don't remember who did it, maybe Cornell did a study and found that 80% of grub treatments are not needed. So most of the time we're applying this insecticide and we don't need it. So if you think if you had a white grub problem last year, you have it year after year after year, you know it's white grubs, put that stuff out in mid-June, let's just say in June, sometime in June. But don't do it really before that and don't do it after that. Your best time is in June. That way, they're high up, they're feeding, and they're going to contact that insecticide will kill them before they've done most of the damage. Most of the products are like a systemic type product, so you can actually treat a little bit sooner, but I would say I wouldn't treat in April. I think we're still in March. I think April is still too early, maybe May, but mid-June to mid-July for our part of Texas is the best time to do it.
Question on the grubs. If you used a predator such as beneficial nematodes, when would be the best time to put that out to grab those larvae?
Probably around the same time, except maybe extend it maybe mid-May to mid-June.
Okay.
I would say probably. Because then you can get them, because they'll also go after the eggs.
Eggs, okay, yeah.
So you were saying that for us, it's later for these guys to come out. So they're different than the ones that are like bombarding us right now?
It may not be one of these two species that actually feeds on turf. Because there are 100 species that look like that one on the left. It may just be a different species. So I wouldn't worry about it, because it's going to happen every year. And they may or may not be the ones. There's a lot of products that work against them. What I would say is don't use the, never mind. Do a think map, okay? So my first question when people think they have grub, or they found a grub or something, was it in your turf? If the answer is no, don't worry about it, because they only feed on turf. And yes, you can get runners into like into a bed, but that's like a snack, right? They want to be where the hunters is. And so yes in turf, okay, keep thinking about it. Was it small, was it half an inch or smaller? And if the answer is no, it was bigger, who cares? Those are decomposers, they're beneficial, or they might be predators too. So leave those guys alone. I would never use the weed and feed and grub stuff because weed and feeds are just bad anyway, right? What are you feeding if you're weeding? You're feeding the weeds, actually killing them, or trying to. And none of them should be applied at the same time, right? You shouldn't fertilize when you control your weeds, and you're not controlling grubs at the time that you're doing either of those things either. So get the separate stuff. I know they sell it because we're dumb homeowners and we buy it, right? So they're marketing to us because we're going to keep buying it, but it's not really effective. And I would always use a granule because then, as opposed to a liquid, so that it's got the longer residual, but it's going to. That's the best way to apply it. Chinch bugs are the second one, and chinch bugs are also kind of around the same timeline that the white grubs are. So chinch bugs, when you see them out of the grass, they're kind of a pearly, iridescent, metallic, almost kind of a shiny wing, black body, not real big at all. The first nymphs are pinky, and then they have a white stripe across their back, but as those wing buds, their wing pads are growing, it starts to hide it from you. They hang out in the thatch, but they're found feeding on the canopy, and they're feeding the juices from it. And so they're sapsuckers. So what you tend to see is like a dead section that's messy. It's not a perfect circle. Insects are asymmetrical. They're random in how they feed. The damage you see is identical on either side of the leaf. Perfect round circle in your grass, whatever. It's not an insect. You're looking at a disease probably or a fungus. So a dead patch surrounded by a yellow halo next to the green grass. And that yellow halo may be really teeny tiny. They're actively feeding in that yellow halo and the green grass. The dead stuff is dead. There's no more food for them. So it might come back in. It'll hopefully fill back in, but don't worry there, right?
Is that the same bug as a chicker? Or no? No.
Different. And you usually, like if someone sends me a picture, I can usually guess it's chinch bugs because it tends to be what you would assume was the hottest part of the lawn. So there's probably not irrigation in this swath right here. You have the asphalt and the concrete all soaking up that heat and radiating out into the middle. And when it's hot, the chinch bugs' natural enemies don't survive, and so they tend to thrive. They can tolerate it. So the hot times of the summer is when we see most of the damage from these guys. So right now we're probably not seeing chinch bugs. It'd be really weird if we were, but we will start to see them as soon as it gets super hot. And that could be June, July, but most of the time it's like August and September. If you fertilize, so a lot of times the grass looks bad, we think I'll fertilize, it'll help it green back up again. But if it's chinch bugs, if you fertilize them. So excess nitrogen increases their reproduction, so don't use fertilization. Try to increase decrease the soil temperature, so increase watering. You can't really put shade cloth or anything like that in your lawn. But if you're allowed to, and that's the problem, right, it's hot. We're on water restrictions, we can't water, and just it's compounding factors. But if you can reduce soil temperatures, that can be helpful. Reducing thatch, because they're hanging out in that thatchy area, that can be helpful as well. Or wait them out, right? And there's a lot of products that you can use for chinch bugs. They're pretty resistant to the thorins, which are the synthetic version of the pyrethrum from the chrysanthemum flowers. So I might avoid the thorins against chinch bugs. And use probably a liquid application would be better because they're not, unless the thatch is super duper thick and that's where they're hanging out, then maybe a granule would kind of bind to that, but that's just, they're not in the soil, so it doesn't really work. Also for chinch bugs, to make sure that you have them, if you can get, we call it the coffee can method, but it's hard to find a coffee can anymore that's not plastic. But if you can get like a big green bean thing, and you cut the top and the bottom out, so you have a cylinder, you put PVC pipe, put it into the soil where, like I might do like this section where it's still kind of green. I'm trying to kind of, so I might stick it right here where I'm kind of straddling the yellow and the green, and you fill it with some soapy water, like half a cup per gallon, not a bunch of soap, and you let it sit for a little while. The chinch bugs will rise to the top, but there's lots of bugs in your grass too, so have a hand lens, have a picture of what it looks like, and take it inside and take a good look at it. And that way you can say, okay, it is a chinch bug problem, it justifies applying that insecticide. So that's it, chinch bugs and white grubs, right? For landscape type plants, like established landscape plants, if you really think about it, we don't worry too much about our shrubs, right? And our trees and our plants that are constantly coming back. We don't baby them and worry about them as much as we do when we first put it in the ground, or our vegetable plants. So if the plant is established, it tends to be strong enough to fight off the bad bugs, or at least tolerate the damage it's doing, or it's large enough that damage isn't as noticeable. But when it's new and you're putting it in the ground, or it's stressed out, that's when they tend to be. So if you're finding insect issues on an established plant, you got to be a detective and think about things, and the landscape will change year to year. Maybe you cut a tree down, or you trimmed a tree, and now that plant's getting way too much sun. Maybe that tree got a little bit taller, and so now there's too much shade. How old is the plant? Maybe you're mulching it like a volcano, like you should do, and it's just not happy. You know, there's a lot of plants that want their flare roots to be exposed, a lot of trees. So do some research on what the plant is and what it's happiest doing, and see if there's something that happened that's now making it unhappy. Because when it's unhappy, the bugs come in. So common landscape plants, aphids, on anything, right? So this also could apply to vegetables when we talk about vegetables. But aphids tend to really like overcrowded areas. So if it's flowers or something, and it's just gotten really dense and close to the ground, maybe you need to trim up some of those little branches coming off of it. Increase the air circulation. Aphids also tend to be a problem when we overwater. Maybe we need to cut back on the irrigation a tad bit, because that humidity growing in there really makes them happy. But they also will tell us when the plant's kind of at the end of its season. So those crepe myrtles, it's going to drop its leaves soon anyway, and for vegetables too, you'll get a lot of them on it when it's close to the end of the season. And I wish I took some pictures of those aphids and just kind of that deformed look on that salvia, but I didn't have time to put it in this presentation. But it's just a different color. It looks ugly. It looks like it's coming out funny and too light and just not a nice, pretty looking leaf. And I knew right away that's probably what it was. But that's new growth, and it's got lots of juices flowing through it, and it's kind of early in the season, so the ladybugs haven't really come in. So new stuff coming out, look for aphids really carefully. They are really wimpy. They die really easy, so insecticidal soap should do the trick for you. The problem with aphids are that if you spray this plant and you kill like 80% of these guys, you still leave 20, even if you kill 95%, you leave a small percentage behind, and they can reproduce without finding a mate. And so they just make clones of themselves and clone and clone and clone. And so it explodes. So don't ever spray once for aphids and then not recheck in a few days. You might need to come back out and do a second treatment. Sometimes all you need is one, but sometimes you don't. But anything in your garage that's meant for that plant will do the trick against them. They're real wimpy. Or just spray the plant with water. Just constantly push them off, break them into pieces, wash off the eggs until you allow that plant to get a little bit bigger, and now it's stronger. Whitefly, I don't have any yet. I think, you're gonna be like, okay, there's just little teeny tiny whiteflies in there. But the left-hand picture is all adults, and then on the right hand, you've got a mix of adults with nymphs, and then little bitty nymphs right there, and then these are the shed seeds of those nymphs. So yes, they can fly, and they're very mobile, but they kind of leave and come right back. But when you treat the plant, you can at least kind of get that other generation, the young ones, so that in a couple weeks there's less, or even in a few days there's less and less and less. So sharp glass of water, especially if you can get one of those wand ones where you go up underneath and kind of bust them off. You will kill some of the adults that way. Neem oil, insecticidal soap, acephate, ortho products are also pretty effective against them. But also, I notice them on shrubbery, I would say this time of year, early on in the spring. And you kind of get close to the plant, you can see them kind of float out. But if you step back, it's green. It doesn't look bad. The growth isn't deformed. And if you wait until it rains, maybe, or you wait a couple of weeks, then they kind of go, that little population explosion kind of goes away. So if the plant is looking happy and healthy and doing what it should, maybe don't worry so much about it. Wait until you need to. This is when you probably, it got a little bit too late. So they're drinking all that sweet stuff and they're peeing that sweet stuff and it promotes sooty growth, sooty mold. But also if you just didn't look at the mold, the leaves don't look great. So just, they affect the overall vigor of the plant. What I wanted to mention about aphids is if you ever have a plant that isn't producing flowers, and it really is at the time when it should be producing flowers, or on vegetables like cucumber, right? You're thinking, man, I should get another harvest of my cucumbers before I pull it. And it's just not doing it, but the plant doesn't look bad. It's just not blooming. Something is keeping it from blooming. Take a good look under the leaves because there's a good chance that the aphids are there and they are sucking the energy out of the plant to the point where it's putting all its energy back into that and it has none left to produce flowers. And if you use an insecticidal soap, like sometimes just within a couple of days you'll get buds coming out. So a plant that's not flowering when it really should be probably has too many aphids on it. Not enough to hurt it, but enough to keep it from flowering. We looked at thrips earlier, but I think that picture is a better picture of that deformed bud. It's never going to look pretty. What I do, but I have enough, my plants are small enough that I can do this, is as the buds are kind of opening a little bit, if it doesn't look like that, I'll take neem oil and I'll spray each and every single one of the buds. And I know that's a lot. So if you have a lot of roses, that's not that healthy. But when it gets like that, don't let it open up. Cut it, get rid of it. But thrips thrive. They love wildflowers and weeds. So the weedier it is, if you have a field next to you, you're always going to probably deal with thrips during this time of year. And they are resistant to spinosad, so I got to X that one off. Don't use that one anymore. I think that's a hibiscus plant. Yeah, it says it is. But those buds, even though it's a bad picture, they are deformed too. So they love hibiscus, they love roses, or really any flowering plant. But I guess hibiscus and roses don't tolerate them as well. You can switch to earth kind roses and they tolerate thrips damage a little bit more, but they're also not really cut flower types of roses. Weed management, prune those infested buds. Switch out varieties if this becomes a constant issue. Reflective mulch, because they have a nymph, they don't have a larva, but they have like this weird in-between kind of a thing, and they will, the nymphs will go down into the soil sometimes, and that reflective mulch, if the plant's not super tall, it's irritating to them. Yes, sir.
What was the oil you said you dropped into the...
Neem, N-E-E-M, neem.
Okay. Thank you.
You could also do like spray irrigation, wet the leaves and try to wash those guys out. Leave those spiders to do their thing. Let them work. Spider mites are teensy tiny. They tend to thrive when it's hot, unless you're in a greenhouse and they're there kind of all the time. If it's in a greenhouse, like a lot of different counties have greenhouses that their master gardeners grow things in, right? And I'll get questions about this all the time. And sometimes the easiest thing to do is just add a couple of fans and just get airflow going. If there is a fan that you can turn on, get the air flowing so things cool down a little bit. Outside in your garden, long term, it's hard to control spider mites. If you're applying products for it, you usually are knocking out all your beneficials and your spider mites explode. And so in reality, just ignoring them if you can is probably your best solution, because insecticides or miticides are not super effective. But if you can decrease the soil temperature so that beneficial predatory mites come back in, that's really effective. So empty your ice bucket once a day, right? And just use that to water your plants. Cool those temperatures down. Use like a cloth maybe if it's in a vegetable garden, if it's raised around it or something. If it's a potted plant, maybe see if you can put it in the shade, put an umbrella in the ground or something, just do something to reduce the soil temperatures. And that will just bring things back into balance. They don't die, but they're not thriving, so there's less of them. But their damage is usually like a stippled effect you'll see on the top of the leaf. If it's a flowering plant, it's not flowering because it's stressed out. You'll notice a little bit of webbing, and you can see them, but they're tiny. And then underneath this leaf, these kind of things that look like dirt, those are little spider mites there. And they're small, and they're like on this plant, I took this picture, and I couldn't find a spider mite, but I could see evidence that they were doing some damage. What they do is their mouth parts literally, like they inject into the cells, and the cells explode, and that's why you get those little light stipples look to it. This is a really heavy slide, but our associate department head came up with it. I don't know what products are going to be real easy for us to find, like at a nursery. Maybe the abamectins. But what's nice about it, though, is that he kind of broke it down to say, like, what's going to be harsher on your beneficials. Like, he's got some that are softer on those. You can get anything off the internet. Just maybe look up this shuttle and make sure it's not meant for, you're not buying 50 pounds of it that's meant for 25 acres and you're going to have it forever. And I suspect that that's probably what a lot of these are. But spider mites are mites, so many of the insecticides are not formulated for mites. And if you notice that nothing's really working, that's one reason why. But the other reason why is you killed all your good guys in the process. Scales are very, very odd bugs. There are soft scales like these that kind of look like oysters, and then hard scales look hard. If you touch them, they're all hard. It's not like this guy's squishy or anything. Soft scales are not connected. No. Soft scales are connected to this turtle shell, and the hard scales are not connected. So it's very hard, but if you're able to pick it off, it might separate. But they look like growths. They just produce this waxy layer over their body that protects them. And so it's really, really hard to control them. So hard scales, neem oils, those things, probably not going to work very well. Soft scales, they can. With any of the scales, a female turns into an egg bomb. And so at some point, these are little teeny, this is a female that's busting open, and these are her little crawlers, her babies that are coming out. And the crawlers are going to go find a spot on this plant to dock down and then start to look like these guys. So the easiest ones to prevent this population from expanding on your plant is to try to catch them when you have crawlers. So you can use like just double-sided tape or something around it, and you'll see, when you see them stuck to it, okay, now I want to treat. With whatever you can. You could use insecticidal soap, you could use neem oil, you could use If it's a hard scale, they will kill the plant. If it's a soft scale, the plant probably won't die. It's just not going to look real good. But it's amazing how quickly they'll kill it. So I don't know my scales very well, but when I get scales on a plant, I usually find out what type of species of plant this is, and then I just Google scales on that type of plant, and then try to match it up with what it is. Because I want to know if it's a hard scale or a soft scale. Hard, yes,
The softest don't kill the plant that hard.
they usually do not. But the plant's not going to look good. You don't want to sweeten it. But you have to do something about the hard scales.
What if you just trim the branch where they're at?
You could do that. There are probably other places. They're going to pop up in other spots, But yeah, you could pick them off. Usually hard scales come in because you have an irrigation problem. The water is clogged up, it's not watering properly. That's usually why they come in, some other issue happens. Soft scales kind of get on anything. Soft scales will get on ornamentals. Hard scales tend to like woody, shrubby type plants. Mealybugs also like more ornamentals. Mealybugs are, I think this is the cotton cushion mealybug, but mealybugs look like little aliens, and their wax is like cotton usually. It's whatever. They're really irritating. If you have potted plants and they're getting into that, they get into indoor plants real well. But they will get underneath the lip of your pots. They will get onto the clips of your plant clips. So if you get mealybugs, you're always going to have them almost, unless you can use a systemic. And even then, they're physically on non-plant stuff. So you can take your plant clips off, and I would throw them in alcohol and leave them there for a couple minutes. You can repot it into a new pot. Alcohol can control them. It dries them out, but take that alcohol and like a Q-tip and get underneath the lip of your pot. I mean, just know if you've got them, they're coming back. And it's enough. And the same thing with them. You could try to, if the plant's big enough, you can try to trim pieces off. I don't know what to say about beetles. Some years they're bad, and you just have tons of them. And so wait them out, because they're so mobile that it's really difficult to manage them. You could use a dust. You could use a liquid application. Really, any formulation like that should work. Wait them out. It's usually just a little outbreak thing, and that looks ugly while it looks ugly, but your plant will grow back. Because they're mobile, it's difficult. I'm not going to cover caterpillars in vegetables because you kill one caterpillar like you kill all of them, so it's the same. But as far as landscape caterpillars go, one, figure out what it is. They are pretty host specific. Most of the time they're pretty host specific. So if you're curious about what caterpillar is utilizing your Cenizo or something, Google caterpillar host plant, whatever it is, and let Dr. Google tell you what caterpillar it is. And that way, if it's something you want to leave, you don't have to worry about it. But when they get numerous like this and they're boring and not very pretty looking and they're eating everything up, then you probably do want to. But the other thing is, hopefully, like in this case, these are bad. I hope no one's planting milkweed and they're mad because a monarch ate it, right? If you're planting a host plant, expect that guy to come eat it down to nothing. Some of them make webs, like the fall webworm makes webs. I think this is an elm. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that one is either. The others might do like, this is lacing. They're making lace work, skeletonization out of the leaf, or just big holes in the leaves. If they make webs, try to break the webs open. See if the wasps and the birds will take care of it that way. But no matter what, you have to break the webs open because the insecticide won't penetrate through that. BT and spinosad work great. They're both organic options and probably work just as well as the other non-organic stuff. Remember, BT has to be consumed, so you will still, if you use BT and spinosad side by side, you can do an experiment. The BT plants will look worse before they look better. Spinosad looks immediately better. So, the situation might dictate what you decide to use. Or really anything that's labeled for worms, caterpillars, chewing insects on that host plant. Should get it. This is another big one, y'all have it, so we don't have to really go through it. But different active ingredients. Most of these are kind of the big stuff, like the for large acreages. But at least you could maybe go off of the formulate or the classification of these insecticides. Okay, and so for vegetables, hopefully that covered. I mean, I know you're going to have other stuff, but hopefully that covered what you see most often. For vegetable pests, if they invade early, you've got susceptible crops. Like when they come in early, it's usually our fault for vegetables. So it could just be the wrong crop for the wrong area. It's a susceptible year. This year, the cucumber beetles are going to be out of control, and it doesn't matter where you are in the state, it's going to be a problem. The good news is we grow our vegetables for us, and we can still go to the grocery store. We're not farmers, and so it's not our livelihood. We can pull that stuff out. cultural, it might be cultural issues, other stressors, it's the wrong situation, it's not getting the right water, the wrong type of sun. But a lot of times the wrong crop for your area. So use that fall and spring planting guide, because it also will say like, don't even attempt to use it. And if it's not on that list, then you probably shouldn't. If they're coming in late in the season, you've gotten a harvest off of them, or hopefully it's your cleanup crew. They're telling you my plant's ready to go, get rid of it. So we'll look at some of the cleanup crew ones, and then like always a cleanup crew, and some of the others. But it's timing. Early on, the plant's not happy. Late on, the plant's ready to go. And then just know how long the sucker's supposed to live, because they don't live forever. So if you grow tomatoes, and most of us do in Texas, our two big ones for homeowners are tomato hornworms and leaf-footed stink bugs. There are others. There's like pinworms, cutworms, aphids will get on these. A lot of other things do, but our two big ones are probably hornworms and stink bugs. Wizzy and I on our podcast, our series right now is going over insects on the family of a plant. So I don't know when Nightshades comes out, but I think it comes out Thursday. It might come out Thursday. So if you want to know about more, here's drone on about more of these. Go listen to it. So the tomato hornworm or tobacco hornworm. This one is a true tomato, I don't know. I think these are tobacco hornworms. The tomato hornworm, see the little white lines? Theirs is like a V, has an extra line to it. But they are big old fat things, thick as your thumb. Mine is not green anymore, it's brown, so is the water. And they get bigger than that. But they have a little horn at their end, and they are a pretty little caterpillar, and they'll turn into that sphinx moth or that hawk moth, that five-spotted hawk moth, which is a pollinator, daytime flyer, but they do a lot of damage to your tomatoes. You can control them with BT or spinosad. What happens is you go on vacation and your tomatoes look so good, and there's all these little buds all over the place, little flowers, and you just know when you come back, you're gonna have tomatoes on that plant. And you come back and it's a stick, or a bunch of sticks, because they eat all the leaves off of it, and then the tomato's just gone, because it can't grow to the point it needs to grow. It's always like a runt and struggling, so it's just wasted. You just have to get rid of it. And it happens overnight. It's super frustrating.
Is that the hummingbird moth? Is that what
Some people call it that, yeah.
Okay.
Some people call it
Because they're pollinators and they're good once they're moths, yes?
Yeah. Yeah, so pick your poison. Do you want one moth to pollinate a little bit, or do you want your whole tomato to be gone? So you can spray as soon as you start seeing the leaves disappear, or really, one of the best ways to control them is go outside at night, get yourself a black flashlight, Lowe's or Amazon. They will illuminate at night, and we grow tomatoes when it's warm, and so they tend to be more nocturnal, so they're actively feeding. That's why you come out in the morning and you're like, where is this thing, right? Shine it, and then you can pick them off. You can hand pick them off, and you'll probably kill more than if you spray. But because again, BT, they have to eat it and eat enough of it, and they're giant things. Like if they've gotten that big, the suckers are huge. So they're eating a whole lot. So they're going to have to eat a lot of leaves to succumb to the BT. Spinosad, they're going to consume it or touch it, and hopefully. But use that black light. A lot of insects illuminate in the black light. So if you go out at night, you'll see all sorts of weird stuff. Leaf-footed bugs are kind of the tomato gardener's arch nemesis. The adult looks like the guy on the right. There's a bunch of them. The immatures, oh, I think I've got some immatures. The immatures to me look like, yeah. There's almost too many in here of the immatures to even know what they look like. But that's how you see them, is where you see one, you see them all clustered like that. So I think they kind of look like spiders, like red spiders with black legs. All of them piercing, sucking mouth parts. And the immatures will sometimes feed on the leaf material, but they really go after the tomato when it's little and green. And you see them all clustered on there, and they are going to do, I don't know why it happens differently, but sometimes it's like the tomato never gets red and it's just rock hard and it just is gross. Or it's like a rotten spot starts to form, it's rotten on the inside. So you can't consume it once they're feeding on it. They are very difficult to spray. because when they're in the adult form, they fly away. And if you've ever tried to chase them down, they're really hard to chase down. The easiest way to control them, I think, is to, when they're like that, if they're just on one tomato or a few, go out with a cup of alcohol. You can do soapy water, alcohol, they die right away, so you kill them. And just flick it. And you may not kill 100% of them, but you probably killed 85, and that's better than most insecticides. And if they're all over the plant, take like a cookie sheet, a shallow pan, fill it with rubbing alcohol, and as hard as you can without damaging the plant, try to jar it and have them drop off like possums. And so you can do that every time you're out there, and you just slowly reduce that population, because especially if they're all over the plant, generally that plant is so dense that it's going to be really hard to spray very well for them. And you can really tell, like on this one, you can see straight through that tomato, right? So he's not touching the tomato. So if you spray and hope they crawl across it, they're probably not going to get enough on their body. So use that rubbing alcohol or soapy water and be the insecticide yourself. Our cucurbits, squash, zucchini, melons, pumpkins, and cucumber. We've got squash vine borers, cucumber beetles, and squash bugs are the three big ones. Squash vine borers are primarily on squash, a little bit zucchini, and pumpkins. Cucumber beetles are primarily on cucumbers. And then squash bugs usually on like the yellow squashes, more than other stuff. So starting with cucumber beetles, there are 3 different looks to them. There are spotted, striped, and banded, so very unique names. They are leaf eaters, and that's where they're a problem in a homeowner's garden. The immatures are called corn rootworms. We don't grow enough corn, we don't grow enough of any one thing for them to get down and feed on the roots there. So it's just them feeding on the leaves. Sometimes they'll scrape the fruit, and you'll see this on melons also. They just smell that the sugar ratio is, they can smell the sugar. So that's ready to pick, it's ready to eat. It's not bad, it would ruin that fruit. You would eat that out of your garden, you probably wouldn't eat that at HEB, right? You probably wouldn't pick it, but it's totally fine. Maybe even, maybe grew a little bit too much and the seeds are a little bit too big. So just telling you that it's got the right sugar ratio to it. So management for them, some years they're just really populated. If you go around and you look at weeds right now, you'll find them on weeds. They overwinter on weeds as adults, which is kind of a problem because once we start growing stuff, they're in the adult form ready to do that leaf eating, and then they move in there. So you could try to do some row covers, let the plant grow a little bit before it flowers. If you know that year after year you have a problem with them, go and transplant instead of seed. Or keep the seeds inside somewhere where you can protect them and watch them and let them grow a little bit before you place them in the ground. The problem with cucumber beetles is that they'll eat the plant. The plant can't outgrow their damage, so we want to get the plant big enough so that it can. Straw mulch can be helpful. You can spray, but in years that they're real bad, it doesn't really matter. You have to just pull it and plant something a little bit bigger a few years later. I mean, a few weeks later. Squash vine borers, we were talking about these with someone earlier. Squash vine, mine are real beat up. They're really a lot prettier. You can see from the picture. They are a moth. The moths will lay their eggs somewhere on the squash or the pumpkin, and then the caterpillar will chew its way into the vine, and it girdles the vine from the inside. So it's cutting off, it's killing the vascular tissue, and it's cutting off the blood supply, right, the food supply to the rest of the plant. And sometimes you can pull it out and it can repair itself, and sometimes the damage is too much that it will never repair itself. So that's why you see it die from the terminal end towards the root. So it's starting to die here because it's not getting any nutrients, and that plant's a goner now. It's not fixable at that point. The best thing to do then is just pull it up and get rid of it because you can't do much. And it's annoying, right? Because look at, they're going to get some squash on them. Really devastating. So there's a couple of things that you can try to do for it. So you can try to treat the vines when the squash vine borers are starting to lay their eggs, so that way you are preventing the caterpillars from chewing their way inside. They're eating it as they chew in, and then they die. I would not use this Espen Valerie. It kind of makes, it can make, like, farmers will be like irritable when they use it. So it can affect your nervous system. It's for some people, it's just a little too harsh. But you don't know when it's exactly time to treat. So I would go online and get yourself some squash vine borer pheromone traps. You get it off Amazon. The trap comes, and you want to get a little triangular trap with it. So the squash vine borer pheromone is impregnated in this little rubber thing, and this is sticky on the 3 sides, and you kind of hang it in your garden. And the males smell it as it smells like a female. So the males are attracted to it. It doesn't manage them in any way, but it tells you the boys are looking for girlfriends, they're starting to mate. Within a week, I want to apply an insecticide because they're around and they're mating. So you could do BT or spinosad, very short residual. So if that BT says you can only apply every 7 to 10 days, that may, or if it's like 10 to 14 days, that may not work. Spinosad, I don't know what it is. Carbaryl gives you a little bit longer residual, maybe up to 2 weeks, and then the synthetic herbicides might give you 4 weeks. So read the label. If you can only apply 3 times in a growing season, that's not going to get you out of the woods with bacteria sprays. The other thing that you can try to do, so when they crawl in, they kind of leave this pulpy mess. So look around, and if you see that, you can try to slice it out and pull them out early. And hopefully they haven't girdled it enough. So that can help. The other thing that you can do is some varieties of squash put out these pups. I know there's a horticultural term for it, and I don't know what it is, but they put out these shoots that then take root. And so now this has its own vascular system. So if this main one got girdled and died, at least you have these little side ones that come off of it. So different varieties. Hubbard squash is a trap crop. So trap crop, companion crop. Trap crops you have to nuke. But so the Hubbard squash is more attractive to them, so they're drawn to that. And then you got to pull that Hubbard squash up. Don't leave it there. Don't let it die. Pull it and destroy it. Like if you can burn it or put it in a black trash bag, get it out of there because you don't want more squash vine borers. And then I don't think I have a slide of it, but there have been a lot of studies using kale and clay and spraying your vines with kale and clay. And and it's ugly. The plant's gonna look really ugly. So if it's for, if you're on the docket to be the garden tour, don't use it. It's not pretty. But if no one's gonna look at your garden, who cares? And it's just that you mix it, you buy it in a bag of solid dust, you mix it with water, you apply it to the thing, and it just sits on there. And so it gums up their mouth parts as they chew in, and they hopefully don't make their way in. So other than that, don't grow squash. There's just once you get them, you're going to keep getting them.
Question. Okay, loofahs are part of the squash family, correct?
I believe so.
Okay, I've grown loofahs for years. I never have a problem with the squash vine borer. But when I have squash, which I really don't try anymore, as the vine borer just attacks it, why doesn't it attack loofah?
Maybe, I don't know. It's just not one of its favorite hosts. Don't know. Okay, squash bugs. Squash bugs like the squash vine borer does. So if you don't have squash vine borers, if you're growing squash, you're probably definitely going to get these guys eventually. I don't really see them on other cucurbits, but I don't grow them on, I don't grow a ton of them. So maybe there's other varieties that they'll get on. But these are kind of like a leaf-footed bug, but fatter, and they don't have that white zigzag. They also don't have the flattened leaf leg, which is how leaf-footed bugs get their name. And then I think that these are kind of like leaf-footed bugs where if you can physically try to control them, but you have to be on it all the time. So what usually happens is I go out and I notice a male and a female butt to butt stuck together mating. And then I start looking at the leaves, and the plant is small enough that I can still touch every single leaf easily and flip it over. and I'll start to notice clusters of brown eggs, that's their eggs, and I just smush them, whether they're empty or not, I pop them, get them off of there. Their damage is usually like yellow flakes, just kind of, and these holes are not caused by them, but it is from the feeding and that plant kind of died there. It almost looks like you had hail damage or wind damage on your plant. And then eventually, the plant will abort any fruit that it has. It never really, it might get pollinated, but it just doesn't start to produce. If you don't control them and you've got it, the plant will stop producing for you. You won't have squash. It will kill the plant eventually.
What if you just chop the leaf that has the bugs and keep going?
I guess it depends on how big the plant is. If it only has 5 leaves, I don't think I would, but just smush it.
Yeah.
If you're gonna go to the trouble of doing that, just put your garden gloves on and smush it so it still can photosynthesize.
Okay.
So you can, so when they're not feeding, the immatures are kind of, and in that bottle, I've got eggs, immatures, and adults, and immatures of all the sizes. They don't really fly. You can try to avoid using mulch because when they're not feeding, they go down to the base of the plant. And if you have mulch, they can find, especially if it's like a bigger, chunkier mulch, they can find a hiding place there. So leave that kind of exposed. You can try to treat the base of the plant so that when they're there, they touch it. Or just smush the heck out of them. I just have scissors that I leave in the bench, right, the storage thing, and I just cut them in half as I find them, and I kill tons of them that way. And it works probably better than using that insecticide. So physically controlling them, I think, is a better way to manage them than spraying.
Usually those squashback is only in that plant or that, because I don't know if I can, if I saw, maybe I confused in the sunflower, the bee one.
That may be a leaf-footed bug under sunflower, or just another type of stink bug, brown stink bug that looks like them. I don't think they go after sunflowers, but I'm not.
I planted 8 of sunflower and I see some of kind of those and I said, oh.
I don't think it's them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Someone else had a question?
Hey, you planted a garden, there was melons, in an area that's never had a garden. Where do the bugs come from?
They come from, well, there's gourds, you know, there's other things in that family that they're just naturally in the area.
Well, I mean, like an area, the yard I've got doesn't have anything in it.
But down the road, someone might have.
Well, the house is 40 years old. It's, I mean,
They find it. They just do. They're in nature somewhere, feeding on something.
So to find these bugs, should it be there like early in the morning and late in the afternoon, or is there a certain time of day that's best?
When it's super duper hot, they're like us, and they're gonna be hiding under the leaves, getting, you know, in the sun. So yeah, I would say like when you're out there watering, or, you know, earlier in the morning or late in the evening, that's probably when more of them are gonna be active. Okay, then cole crops. So the most common cole crop pests are harlequin bugs or cabbage loopers, cabbage worms. There's a number of different caterpillars that will get on your cole crops, but these are probably the 2 big ones. Harlequin bugs are a cleanup crew. If you've got harlequin bugs, that plant needed to go, and if it didn't need to go, you planted something weird. We had them in the children's garden at the botanical garden, tons of them. And I don't know if I can do that. Yeah, here they are. This is where I got my harlequin bugs from. Because someone planted they planted some really weird, exotic kale or something, and they were all over it, and I was like, we planted the wrong thing, that's what's causing it. I will get harlequin bugs because I let my broccoli flower for the bees, and I just know I'm gonna get harlequin bugs that come in. So, you know, if they're there, they are telling you that plant is done or it's the wrong type of plant. And they're a gorgeous, cool looking bug. I think there are eggs in there, but the eggs are, I mean, striking. They're only about the size, a little bit bigger, I guess, than a ladybug. They're not like a large stink bug like that squash bug. So I would say if you see them, get rid of them. Like, look at this plant. They have piercing, sucking mouth parts. There's harlequin bugs all over it. The holes are not caused by them. So this plant has a lot.
So when you see them all over your broccoli, do you kill them? What do you do?
I just leave them. Yeah. But I can tolerate many more insects than than normal people can do. I'm also very much of the philosophy that when insects come in, it was meant to kill the plant. I wasn't meant to grow that plant at that time. There's few times when I'll take action against things. And in my vegetable garden, I definitely don't care that much. But like, for instance, I had hard scales on shrubs that lined the house. And it killed one, and another one was starting to die. And then the aesthetics of the house weren't nice, right? So I had to do something about that, unless I wanted to take up all of those shrubs. And so, it's situational. But I tolerate a lot of insects, a lot more than most people. So cabbage loopers, cabbage worms, cabbage white is another one. Those white butterflies that are flying around, they will lay eggs that will turn into caterpillars that will feed on pole crops. They're eating on other mustards and other things that are just natively growing. So that's why you see them on trails and things like that. But the loopers, the worms that go after your cabbages, pole crops, broccoli, they're going after the leaves. And what we've learned is that what you want to do is worry about your plant before it gets to that cupping stage, because it needs those leaves to photosynthesize to have the energy to do the cupping and make the ball, the head of lettuce or cabbage or whatever, right? The broccoli. So treat early, and then once it's gotten to the cupping stage, it's probably going to be just fine. There's plenty of other leaves, unless it's down to nothing. There's plenty of other leaves that it can photosynthesize, and this is really just aesthetic. We don't consume that part of it, right? We consume the head or whatever it is. We also learned that don't overcrowd things, and this goes for the whole entire garden too. If it says to plant it every 18 inches apart, don't plant it 6 inches apart and then try to cull it later. My problem is when I do seed and then you're supposed to, pull them up. I'm like, but what if the one I'm pulling up is the one that was going to survive? But don't plant them too close, not crowd them. Water, fertilize them the way that you're supposed to. Because at the end of our study, if we watered well, we fertilized when we should. We just took good care of them. They got watered really well. There were volunteers out there all the time. Because it wasn't like at home. Even the control plots, yes, they looked ugly on the outside, but the cabbages weighed the same as those we treated with BT and spinosad. So our end result was there was no significant difference. Aesthetically, it wasn't as pretty. So I would get on a regimen early on. I would do it every 2 weeks. I don't think I would do it every 3 weeks. In that, let me get to so early, in the early, whether you're going from seed or little transplant, and once you get into that cupping stage, you could probably stop spraying it with stuff, because it's going to hopefully continue to grow. But when it's, we're getting here, it's got enough leaves hopefully to photosynthesize. But these young guys really need some help. So that they can get to the point of producing the food that you're going to consume from it. Here's a couple of the others. So that's one of the cabbage whites. And then there's like a European cabbage white too. So this is a looper right here. I think this is a looper, and I think this is one of this one's babies. So even on one plant, you might find multiple species. What does it matter? It doesn't. BT or spinosad worked really well against both of them. But again, BT looked ugly until it didn't, because they had to eat it, and spinosad looked real good real early, but it's also about twice the price, so just depends. There's 2 examples of it. I think now we're getting into maybe like some just random stuff. So fire ants won't hurt your plants in any way, but they sting you, and they're not nice necessarily to have to worry about in your garden. They love vegetable gardens, they love raised beds, because it's always watered and that soil is really easy for them to manipulate, right? So there's lots of different species of ants. There's over 85 different species in Texas. Fire ants are the only ants that make those fluffy above ground mounds that pile up. There's not a single hole that they come in and out of. They come out from everywhere. There's a hole at someone else. They go up vertical surfaces to get you. Other ants want to get the heck away from you. They know you're a giant, but these guys don't care. And then most of us will react with that pustule that forms. It's a sting, it's not a bite. And so it's actually venom that they're injecting, like a wasp or a bee does. So you have basically 2 umbrella options. You can treat each individual mound that you see, or if it's all throughout your turf or your lawn, you can do a broadcast treatment. So individual mound treatment, you can use anything, a dust, a drench, a granule, or a bait. If you're doing a broadcast treatment, you're using a bait or a granule most of the time. So, I don't know if I have a picture of it. So dusts are fine, I guess, if you find each an individual one. The drenches can work sometimes and not always. Have you ever noticed that like after it rains, those mounds pop up along the sidewalk or your driveway? You're like, well, what was it before? It was there, it was just probably underneath where it was cool. And it got wet, and so they got forced up. So I don't know if I have a picture. I don't. There's a cool guy, Walter Schinkel is his name, T-S-C-H, Schinkel. And he was a fire ant researcher out of University of Florida. And he would melt aluminum, pour it into different ant species mounds, and then excavate it. And so there's a visual picture of how these mounds can be like go horizontally like for 6+ feet, how they can go 6+ feet down. So, you know, we're a little bit rockier, so it's probably all over the place. So the point is, like, when you treat that mound that you see, that's the tip of the iceberg, right? So that's why baits, I prefer to use baits because I'm putting out far less insecticide. They're getting it out of the environment, but I also don't have to worry about, did I just move them over, or did I just kill this section, and now I have 3 separate mounds that popped up all the way around it. So this is a hodgepodge of different baits. I don't know if it's still labeled like this, but this Fergalome Come and Get It has spinosad as the active ingredient, and it's the only bait that you could find like over the shelves easy that is labeled for use inside of a vegetable bed. The others you can apply outside, they'll forage for it outside, but it's just not labeled for use inside the vegetable bed. There's another one called Extinguish, which you could probably find at the feed store or online pretty easily, and that, I believe, is also labeled for inside of a bed. But that Come and Get It is a gardener's favorite, I would say. Amdro, there's all different types of Amdros, but Amdro is like the industry standard. And so you see the word bait somewhere on that one. And then I think this one has bait too. So these are baits. But if it just has granule, like some of them might say granular bait, but these are just granules. Those are going to bind to the soil and just make a barrier, force them to stay down below. Baits actually control the colony, kill the colony, because you got to kill the queens, multiple queens to kill the colony. And the baits eventually get fed to her. They do take about 2 weeks to work, and that's because those mounds are so big, so it's got to get to all the pockets where all the queens are. Don't water it in, it's food. You don't eat soggy toast, they don't want to eat soggy bait. I see people water it all the time and then say, it didn't work. Yeah, they didn't eat it. And then we talked a little bit about we talked a lot about white grubs earlier, but sometimes you're digging in your grass or I'm at the end of, I have no more words for my writing. we're on the last page, right? So we're at the end of this. But you're digging in your mulch or your garden or whatever, and you come across these gigantic grubs, like as big as your hand. And those are going to probably turn into rhino beetles or Hercules beetles, which are kind of speckled and really pretty. They are good. Don't kill these guys. You're definitely going to see them. They're environmental indicators. Where you find those grubs, you have rich organic matter in your soil. So you're doing really good. But I know you see them and you get scared and you're going to say, I've killed hundreds of them. Somebody will. Just next time, just leave them. Just let them do their thing. If you don't like them, feed them to your chickens. Give them to a school. Save them for me and I'll take them to schools. They're beneficial. They eat decaying organic matter. So if you believe that they're feeding on your roots and they're killing your plant, let's talk about why it's decaying instead of worrying about the grubs. The only time they might become an issue is they can get into palms. When you've planted the palms in like an area that gets way too wet, and they turn that hard center into like a pulp and they'll kill the palm. But that was your problem there. They just were opportunistic.
Okay, so in my garden beds, I'm doing like layers, and I have gone and got leaves from the yard, and I put that at the very bottom, and then we're also digging dirt just to mix with the soil because it's expensive. And sometimes I find it in there, but with the leaves at the bottom, does that give it something to eat?
Yeah, they're gonna find food in that soil.
So it's
Yeah.
okay that they're in there? Okay. But the little one is not that.
The little one is not that, it's also in your turf, not anywhere else. I mean, they gotta start out that small, right? They're coming from a little place. They get that. And I think that's it. I don't know if that works anymore, but it would go to, like a Qualtrics survey. If it doesn't go very well. Yes, ma'am.
Question. So you were talking about the grubs being in the soil. Are the cicada nymphs also in the soil now because they come out during the summertime?
Yeah,
So how do you tell the difference between, because they start out the same way, right? They're larvae and then they turn into the...
They look like, you know, when they crawl out of the ground, they look like that in the ground.
Okay, so they're not
White grubby looking things. Yeah, yeah. And I don't know if I've ever dug one of those guys up, so they must go pretty deep. And I suspect they're probably like at the base of tree stumps, so it's not like the base of the tree. So they're probably not where you're digging.
But they're in their shell.
They are in a shell. Yeah, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Go back to cutter ants.
Okay. Okay, so if you have leaf cutter ants and they are within 3 feet of a structure, you can treat them as like a termite, because they are now a structurally important pest with termiticide, Termidor, which will kill them. But if they're not 3 feet from the structure, it's literally like playing whack-a-mole, because the colony is so large. So, I mean, you Google like an excavation of one. It's like a city block. I mean, it is so deep. So you're treating sections of them, and you're never really going to actually control them. You can try Amdro Ant Killer. It's black with red on it. Used to be called Amdro Ant Block. It is palatable to them, but you will never kill a colony. You can just suppress it.
Well, we've got neighbors working together now.
Yeah. As soon as you see the first one active, don't wait for it to do damage. Reapply your Amdro. You're gonna be, and you can apply it 15 times in a summer.
And we do have it next to the structure.
If it's next to the structure, it's going to be expensive. It's going to be like treating for termites, but because when they get close to the structure, your foundation can crack. I mean, it's a hollow spot underneath. So it is a structural pest. Some pest control companies don't know that or do that. So if they won't do it, contact the next one. But it is considered a structural, but the problem is it has to be within 3 feet of the structure. And then they'll use Termidor, and that will may not kill the whole entire colony, but it will certainly kill that good chunk of it. And your structure will then be protected. And they might do like just a partial treatment, maybe not all the way around, but just where they're active. But they can't guarantee that they're not going to crawl over here. And so you could probably parcel it out to make it more economically reasonable. Yes, ma'am. They do? Okay. If y'all have time, do it for me. I appreciate it. Thank you. I don't know that I have a door prize anymore.
There's a way that you can tell a difference between the grub and the
All that, with the small ones, if it's in your turf and your turf doesn't look great, you just assume it's dead. But you can identify them. You actually look at their butt slit. They have an anal slit, and you look at that, and I don't have the clue for that. So you could give it to me, but I still would,
That was a grub.
that will probably turn into the rhino beetle or.
Okay, so how did it get so big and not turn into something?
Yeah. Well, I also, you know how that one is white and the other one is not? They have like bacteria in their gut, and so when they die, they turn black. I also flash boiled that one, so he kind of got cooked, so he's a little fatter than he normally would be. But it kept him white, or her.
And they don't do nothing for the plants.
They don't hurt the plants. They are helping the plants.
But the little ones also do?
The little ones in your turf might be feeding on it. Yeah, if it's not in your turf, don't worry about it. Yeah, just only worry about it if it's small and in your turf. Yeah. All right.